I've always believed that when you travel alone, your reflection becomes your only company. It's something you start to notice after weeks on the road, how your own face in the window at night can start to look like someone else's. My name's Eli Harper, I'm 35, and last September I took my old 1978 Volkswagen Westphalia up through Alaska's Glacier Bay National Park. I wasn't running from anything dramatic, just trying to clear my head after a long breakup, a long job, and a life that had started feeling like white noise. I thought the silence of the northern coast would help me find something like peace. What I found instead was something that's followed me ever since. Not in body, but in reflection. It was late in the season, past tourist time, when the light starts to thin early and the air smells of salt and wood smoke. I'd parked the VW near a small gravel turnout facing the bay, the kind of spot locals say is safe, but too quiet for most campers. I'd read online about a few scattered stories, sightings of strange lights on the water, shapes moving near the tree line, but every park has its legends. That first evening, I remember the quiet was so complete it made my ears ring. Even the sound of the tide felt heavy, like it was dragging something under it. I was alone, or so I thought. The first strange thing happened when I washed my face in the tiny sink of the RV. The faucet rattled a little, the way it always did, but when I looked up at the mirror above it, there was a faint smudge on the glass, like the outline of a handprint. Not oily, not dusty, more like condensation, but I hadn't boiled anything or run the heater. I wiped it off with my sleeve and laughed it off. You know how old campers are, always leaking air through every seam. But the odd thing was that when I looked again, there were still 5 faint finger marks pressed to the mirror's edge, as if someone had been holding the glass from the other side. That night, I couldn't sleep. The air was colder than I expected, and the wind coming off the bay, the camper's shell creak in short, rhythmic bursts, a kind of wooden groan that rose and fell like breathing. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of footsteps outside, not crunching leaves or breaking twigs, just a single, soft, scuffing sound, like bare feet on gravel. I sat up and turned off the small lamp, listening. The sound paused when I did, as if it were listening too. After a minute, I told myself it was probably a raccoon or a fox, but the sound didn't move away. It circled, slow, deliberate, and then came to rest just behind the driver's door. I could see its shadow, faintly under the glow of the half moon. The shape was wrong, too tall, too still. I didn't move, I just stared through the windshield, every nerve in me alive. Then, very faintly, something tapped against the driver's side mirror. 3 slow, even taps. When I finally found the courage to reach for my flashlight, the shadow shifted and disappeared. I shone the light through the window, but the turnout was empty. The tide whispered against the rocks below, and nothing else moved. Still, I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat with my back against the kitchen counter, listening to the walls creak, until morning light made the water look calm again. The next day, I drove further inland, deeper into the spruce forest, trying to convince myself it had been nerves or some trick of the dark. The drive helped. Miles of golden aspen, mist rising between trunks, the hum of the van like a heartbeat under my seat. I stopped at a ranger station, chatted briefly with an older volunteer named Hank, who told me no one camped near the bay this late in the year. "The fog plays tricks on you," he said, laughing lightly. "You'll think you see faces in it." That night, I parked near a cluster of birch trees beside a frozen pond. The temperature dropped fast after sunset. The VW's old heater clicked and sputtered, barely keeping up. As I settled in for the night, I noticed something strange. The handprint on the mirror was back. Only now it wasn't faint. It was clear, almost perfect. A small hand, pale in the light of my lantern, pressed flat against the glass from the inside. I touched the surface. It was cold but smooth. No residue, no moisture. My own reflection looked pale, hollow-eyed, the way faces do when light hits from below. I told myself I'd wipe it off in the morning and crawled into the sleeping bag. But I couldn't shake the image of that hand. I woke again sometime before dawn. This time, the sound wasn't footsteps. It was whispering. Not words I could understand, just a soft, repetitive murmuring. It came from outside, then from within the van itself, as though the walls were breathing it. I turned on the lantern, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. The mirror above the sink glowed faintly, like it was reflecting light that wasn't there. I approached it slowly, half terrified, half curious. My reflection looked back at me, but there was something off about it. My mouth was closed, but in the glass it seemed to be whispering. Moving slightly out of sync, I froze. The whispers stopped. The forest outside fell silent. And for a long moment, I just stood there, my breath fogging the air, staring into my own face that wasn't quite my own. Then all at once, the reflection blinked, but I didn't. I stumbled back, hitting my shoulder against the counter. The lantern flickered, went dark, and for an instant the mirror shone with a kind of dim internal light. I saw the reflection step back into darkness, its eyes black, the faint outline of a small hand rising once more to the glass, this time from behind me. When the light finally steadied again, the reflection was normal. My hand, my face, my breath, nothing else. But something inside me had shifted, like the air itself had gotten heavier. I didn't leave that morning. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to understand. Maybe I didn't want to admit fear had gotten to me. But as I made coffee, I realized the reflection in the pot of boiling water moved before I did, always a half second early, always watching. That was when I finally started to feel it. Not fear exactly, but recognition. Whatever was in that mirror wasn't trying to scare me. It was showing me something. Something about myself I didn't want to see. That morning, the world outside felt unusually still. Not peaceful, just suspended. Like sound itself had been turned down a notch. The trees around the pond didn't sway, not even a breeze. I sat in the driver's seat of the VW, staring out through the windshield at a thin mist crawling low across the ground. It moved slowly, as if following the lines of the terrain, like water remembering the shape of an old river. I tried to convince myself the reflection incident was just exhaustion, maybe a trick of light, maybe even the beginnings of altitude sickness. But that explanation fell apart when I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. It was smiling, a small, faint smile, just at the corner of the mouth. Mine wasn't. I froze, watching it, my throat dry, heartbeat slow and loud. The reflection tilted its head slightly, as though it were studying me. I blinked, and it was gone. Back to normal. But the unease it left behind didn't fade. It sat in my stomach like cold metal. By noon, I decided I couldn't stay there another night. I packed up fast, slamming the cabinet doors a little harder than I meant to. When I shut the mirror cabinet above the sink, the glass rattled, and for a split second I thought I saw movement behind it, something pale and fast. I stepped back, pulse racing, then forced myself to open it again. Just shelves. A folded towel, a bar of soap, nothing more. Still, I didn't like how the air felt in the RV anymore, too dense, like the oxygen had weight. So I drove. I didn't care where, as long as I kept moving. The gravel road curved through the forest, mist curling between the trunks, sunlight flashing in shards through branches. But the longer I drove, the stranger it got. I must have passed the same red birch 3 times, the one with the lightning scar down its center. I was sure of it. The road wasn't looping, but somehow it felt like it was folding back in on itself. The odometer kept ticking forward, yet the scenery refused to change. Every mile looked like the last. By late afternoon, my nerves were raw. I stopped the van, stepped out, and just stood there, breathing hard. The silence was suffocating. Not the kind that's empty, but the kind that feels like something's listening. Then faintly, from somewhere down the tree line, I heard it again. That slow, rhythmic tapping. 3 knocks, like before. Only this time it came from the direction of the van. I turned slowly, half afraid of what I'd see. There was nothing around the VW, no person, no animal. Just the pale reflection of the van itself in the pond beside it. The water was calm, perfectly still, like a sheet of black glass. I stared at it for a long time before I realized something was wrong. In the reflection, the RV's door was open. My stomach dropped. The real one, right in front of me, was closed. I took a step closer to the pond, and the reflection seemed to ripple slightly, though the air around me was still. In the water, I could see a faint figure standing in the doorway of the reflected van. Just a silhouette, narrow shoulders, long arms. I blinked hard, and the reflection changed again. The figure turned its head toward me. I stumbled back, slipped on the wet grass, and when I looked again, the pond showed only sky and trees. I ran to the van, yanked the door open, and climbed inside. The mirror over the sink was dark, darker than it should have been, like the glass itself had thickened. My reflection stared back at me, calm, expressionless. That night, I parked closer to the main road. I could see a single ranger station light about a mile away, flickering through the fog. I told myself I'd drive there at first light and explain something. But as I sat there, engine off, wrapped in my jacket, I started hearing a faint sound from the back of the van. At first, I thought it was the heater fan trying to start, but the VW was off. Then I realized it was breathing, quiet, shallow, uneven. I turned around slowly, shining the flashlight toward the sleeping area. Nothing. The sound stopped. I sat frozen for a full minute. Then the mirror above the sink fogged over, just like before. A handprint appeared, slow and deliberate, pressing from the inside. Something in me snapped. I grabbed the small hammer I kept under the driver's seat. I didn't even think, just acted. I struck the mirror hard enough to crack it across the middle. The sound was sharp, ringing. A jagged line split the reflection in two. For a moment, the air in the RV seemed to rush inward. A pressure change so sudden my ears popped. The lights flickered. The crack in the mirror spread, spiderwebbing outward like veins, and then everything went completely still. No more breathing, no fog, no whispers. I waited, holding my breath, staring at the broken glass. My own face stared back in a dozen fragments. It looked strange, unfamiliar, like I'd seen it too many times to trust it anymore. That was when I heard a faint voice, so soft I almost mistook it for my own thought. "Don't leave yet." The sound didn't come from outside. It came from the mirror. Every instinct told me to run, but I couldn't move. The voice came again, this time clearer, layered with what sounded like a child's breath behind it. "You broke it. You broke the door." I took a step back, heart hammering so hard I thought I might faint. The mirror shimmered slightly, the fractured surface catching the lantern light like water. Behind the reflection, deep in the glass, I thought I saw something moving. Shapes, faint outlines, like people pressed against a window in a storm. The air grew colder, and the smell of salt water filled the van again. Then, from somewhere beneath the floorboards, I heard that slow tapping return. 3 knocks, perfectly even. And then, silence. I turned off the lantern. I don't even know why. Maybe because part of me thought I could stop it by refusing to look. But even in the dark, I could feel it. That same presence waiting just behind the thin wall of reflection. I whispered to myself, again and again, "It's not real." But my reflection didn't move its lips. The sun never really came up that next morning. It just sort of leaked into the mist, turning everything the color of an old photograph. I sat behind the wheel for hours, staring at the cracked mirror, watching the lines in the glass form strange shifting shapes every time the fog outside moved. I told myself I was leaving, that I'd get on the road, find the ranger station, and never come back to Glacier Bay. But every time I reached for the ignition, something in my chest froze. Not fear exactly, but something heavier. The mirror was whispering again, not in words this time, but in rhythm, the faint hiss of breath syncing with mine, as though it were learning how to breathe through me. My reflection flickered faintly in the broken shards, and I swear, for a second, it wasn't me at all. It was someone smaller, a child. I blinked and it was gone. That's when I noticed something on the floor, a small, round bead of glass. It must have fallen from the mirror when I hit it. But when I picked it up, it wasn't cold. It was warm, and it pulsed faintly in my hand, like a heartbeat. Something about that broke the stillness inside me. I shoved the bead into my pocket, started the engine, and drove toward the faint glow of the ranger station light I'd seen the night before. The tires crunched on frost and gravel, the headlights cutting through mist so thick it looked alive. But no matter how far I drove, the light never seemed to get closer. It hung there, distant and dim, floating just beyond the fog. I drove for what felt like an hour, then 2, until I realized the odometer hadn't changed. I was still in the same place, the same trees, the same mist. That was when the radio crackled. I hadn't turned it on. The power knob was still off, but through the static came a low voice, distorted, faint. It said my name, just once. Eli. I slammed the radio dial with my fist, but the voice came again, this time clearer, almost pleading. Turn around. My blood went cold. I looked at the mirror on the windshield, half cracked, and behind my reflection, there was movement. A figure sitting in the back seat. I didn't look long. I hit the gas, heart pounding, eyes locked on the road. The mist parted slightly, revealing a narrow wooden bridge ahead that I swore hadn't been there before. I didn't think, I just drove. The tires thudded over the planks, echoing hollow under me. Halfway across, the engine sputtered. The headlights flickered. The van slowed. The air outside the windshield shimmered like heat rising off asphalt, only it wasn't warm. It was freezing, the kind of cold that burns your lungs when you breathe. Then I saw it. On the other side of the bridge, just beyond the fog, stood an old Airstream trailer, polished silver, gleaming faintly in the dim light. Its door hung open, and through the doorway, I could see another mirror. Tall, framed like one from a bedroom. It was facing out toward the bridge, catching my headlights and throwing them back at me. I don't know what made me get out of the van. Maybe I thought there'd be people inside. Maybe I just wanted proof that I wasn't losing my mind. I walked slowly across the bridge, boots clanging softly against the damp wood. The air felt charged, the mist humming faintly, like static before a storm. When I reached the Airstream, I noticed something strange. The ground around it was covered in footprints, bare ones. Small, as if a child had been walking in circles through the frost. They led up to the door and vanished into the darkness inside. I stepped closer. The mirror glowed faintly, not reflecting me, but the inside of my own van. My stomach twisted. I leaned forward and the reflection moved. It showed me standing inside the VW, looking into the mirror. Only my reflection wasn't alone. Behind me stood that same small, pale figure, eyes wide, lips moving soundlessly. I stumbled back, nearly slipping on the icy ground. But something drew my eyes back to the glass, and this time I saw more. I saw myself sitting behind the wheel again, driving through endless fog. I saw my hands gripping the steering wheel until the knuckles turned white, and then I saw the cracked mirror above the RV sink, glowing faintly, the cracks shifting like veins. The reflection wasn't showing me the past or the future. It was showing me the trap. My knees felt weak. I turned to run back to the VW, but the bridge was gone. Only mist. Endless, suffocating mist. The Airstream behind me groaned, metal shifting as if something inside had moved. Then from the open doorway, the same child's voice whispered, "You're already in it." I spun around, flashlight trembling in my hand. The mirror flickered. The child's hand, small, gray, translucent, pressed against the inside of the glass. Then another hand. Then a face, pale and smooth, eyes like hollow glass marbles. The glass began to ripple outward, the way water does when something's trying to break through. I backed away, tripping over a root, landing hard on my shoulder. My flashlight rolled out of reach. The mirror's light pulsed brighter, slow, steady, like a heartbeat matching the bead in my pocket. And then it stopped. The light vanished. The Airstream door swung shut on its own, and everything went still again. I don't remember how I made it back to the VW. I remember cold air burning my throat, trees closing in on either side, the fog thinning just enough for the van's shape to appear ahead. I threw myself inside, slammed the door, locked it, and sat there shaking until my breath turned to mist in the air. When I finally looked up, the cracked mirror was glowing again. But this time, it wasn't my face I saw. It was the inside of the Airstream and the pale figure standing behind the glass, watching me. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the warm glass bead, and watched it pulse in time with my heartbeat. And then, for the first time, I realized it wasn't pulsing with me. It was controlling me. I dropped it, hard, and the instant it hit the floor, the glow in the mirror flickered out. The reflection went dark. The silence that followed felt endless. I don't know how long I sat there after that. Maybe an hour, maybe all night. The engine had gone cold and every window had fogged over from my breathing. The world outside was still gray, the kind of color that never changes, whether it's dawn or dusk. I remember thinking, if I start the engine and drive, I might just keep driving forever, like the road itself had swallowed every way out. But something had changed inside the van. The air didn't feel heavy anymore. It was lighter, almost hollow. The cracked mirror above the sink had gone completely dark, but when I leaned closer, I could still feel warmth radiating from it, faint and steady, like the ghost of something still alive on the other side. I needed to move, to leave Glacier Bay, to see someone, anyone. So I started the engine and pulled away from the clearing. The mist seemed to lift as I drove, trees emerging in slow layers like memories resurfacing. I turned south toward the highway. For a while, I let myself believe it was over. But the closer I got to town, the more I noticed something strange. Every reflective surface, the side mirrors, the chrome handles, even the windshield when the light hit it just right, showed things a fraction of a second late. Like they weren't keeping up with the real world anymore. I'd move my hand and my reflection would hesitate before following. The delay grew longer the further I drove, as though something on the other side was lagging behind, or refusing to let go. By the time I reached the ranger station, the place was empty. The lot was full of old tire tracks, half filled with frost, the windows covered in condensation. I knocked, called out, circled the building. No answer. I finally found a landline near the back entrance, tried to dial for help, but the line was dead. The receiver pressed against my ear, crackled faintly, and then I heard a voice. Not through the phone, behind me. It was a man's voice, quiet, tired. "You made it farther than most." I turned slowly. There was a ranger standing by the door. Gray hair, weathered skin, heavy coat. I recognized him immediately. Hank, the same man I'd met days earlier. But something about him was off. His clothes were damp, his eyes sunken, his breath misting the air even inside the building. He looked past me toward the VW outside. "You should have broken it sooner," he said softly. "The mirror?" I asked. He nodded. "That's not glass, son. That's a gate. Every old rig that breaks down out here, the people who vanish, that's where they go. It doesn't take you all at once, just your reflection first." I felt my pulse thudding in my throat. "What happens to the reflection?" Hank's eyes shifted toward the window. For a moment, I thought I saw movement, like someone walking past outside, though the van was empty. "It learns," he whispered. "It mimics, then it takes your place." I backed away from him, shaking my head. "That's not possible. It's just..." He cut me off, voice sharp. "Look at your reflection, right now." I turned toward the window, and for a heartbeat, everything inside me went still. In the glass, I saw myself standing exactly where I was, but my reflection was smiling. It raised its hand slowly, placed its palm against the window. My real hand stayed at my side. Then its mouth moved, and though no sound came through, I knew what it said. "Let me in." The window fogged under its touch, leaving behind the faint outline of 5 small fingerprints, smaller than mine, child-sized. I stumbled back, breath catching in my throat, but Hank didn't move. He just watched, his face unreadable. "You can't drive away from it," he said finally. "You can only choose which side you stay on." And then, before I could speak, he was gone. Just gone. No footsteps, no door creak, only the echo of his words hanging in the cold air. I ran outside. The van was idling, though I'd turned it off. The headlights flickered in and out like a heartbeat. I reached the driver's door and froze. Someone was sitting in the driver's seat. Me. Or at least something that looked like me. Its hands rested on the steering wheel, face lit by the flicker of the dash light. It turned slowly, meeting my eyes through the window, and when it smiled, I felt my legs give out. The face was mine, but younger, smoother, and in its eyes there was nothing but still water. The reflection leaned closer to the glass, mouthing the same words I'd seen before. "Let me in." I did the only thing I could. I ran. The forest swallowed me fast, branches tearing at my sleeves, the cold cutting deep into my lungs. I don't remember falling, but when I came to, the fog had cleared and the sun was low, gold through the trees. The van was gone, so was the road. Only the sound of distant water remained, soft, steady, like breath through the trees. That was 3 months ago. I never found the VW again. Rangers searched the area, found tire tracks that ended near the bay, as if the van had driven straight into the water. They said the currents there could take anything out to sea in hours. Sometimes late at night, I'll catch my reflection in the window and see it smiling before I do. I tell myself it's just my imagination, just leftover fear. But last week, when I looked closer, I noticed something small pressed against the inside of the glass, a faint handprint, smaller than mine, and when I wiped it away, the glass stayed warm, as if something was still breathing, just behind it. So if you ever camp near Glacier Bay and you find an old Volkswagen sitting quiet by the shore, don't go near it. Don't look in the mirrors. Don't even glance at the windows after dark, because what's waiting there doesn't want to scare you. It wants to remember you. And once it does, you'll never know which side of the glass you're on again. The rain didn't start as a storm. It began as a whisper on the windshield, one of those soft, rhythmic taps that make you believe the forest is just breathing around you. My name's Eli Mercer, 42 years old, born and raised in Utah, and I've been RV camping across the American wilderness for nearly 2 decades. I've slept through snow in the Rockies, sandstorms in Arizona, and lightning in the Great Plains. But nothing prepared me for the night the land itself tried to wash me away. I was camping deep in the San Rafael Swell, Utah's rugged heart. Red canyons, slot valleys, the kind of landscape that swallows sound. I'd driven my RV, an old Winnebago I'd rebuilt myself, down a dirt road that wasn't on most maps, just a faint line that seemed to vanish into the desert. It was late spring, the air sharp with the scent of rain and sage. I'd stopped near a dry wash that looked peaceful, flat, harmless, a ribbon of pale sand winding between cliffs. Locals always warned about camping near washes, but it hadn't rained in days, and the forecast was clear. I'd learned to trust my own eyes more than a weather app. That was my first mistake. I remember standing outside at dusk, barefoot, feeling the grit of sandstone beneath my feet. The wind carried that electric scent that always precedes rain, but the sky above me was a bruised purple fading into calm. I thought it was beautiful, the kind of solitude people dream about when they leave the city. My RV stood there like a solitary ship in a dry sea, its white paint reflecting the last light. I made coffee, recorded a quick clip for my channel, talked about off-grid survival and finding peace in isolation. My voice sounded steady, confident, like a man who believed nature was his equal, not his enemy. But the desert has a way of testing pride. It started with a sound I couldn't place, distant, muffled, like someone rolling a heavy barrel through the canyon. It wasn't thunder, not at first. The air was too still for that. I turned off my lantern, stood outside, and listened. The silence was immense. Then it came again, closer this time, a deep rumble that seemed to come from beneath the ground. I told myself it was wind echoing off the walls. That's what I wanted to believe. But the sky flickered white for a second, and when it went dark again, I saw it. Thin threads of water crawling through the sand under my RV. Not rushing, not threatening, just appearing where no water had been a minute before. It's strange how the brain negotiates with danger. I knew what a flash flood could do. I'd seen the aftermath. Entire vehicles tossed like toys, canyons carved deeper overnight. But part of me refused to believe it was happening now. I climbed into the driver's seat, engine off, headlights cutting through the rain that had begun to fall harder. My hands were steady, but my breathing wasn't. I kept telling myself, it's just surface runoff. It'll pass. When the first wave hit, it sounded like a freight train slamming into metal. The RV jolted sideways. Coffee splashed across the counter. Outside, I saw a wall of brown water ripping down the wash, carrying branches, rocks, everything it touched. The desert that had been bone dry minutes ago was now alive and furious. I turned the ignition, but the tires spun uselessly in the sand. The water was rising fast, 6 inches, a foot, maybe more. It pushed against the RV's frame, groaning like the world itself was angry I'd parked there. I shifted into 4-wheel drive, slammed my foot on the pedal, but the vehicle barely moved. The headlights illuminated a river where there had been none. Panic crawled up my throat. That's when instinct took over. I grabbed my flashlight, my emergency bag, and climbed toward the driver's side window. The door wouldn't open. The water pressure was too strong, so I crawled through the passenger side, boots sinking into the current. The water was cold, bitter, clawing at my legs like it wanted to pull me down. The sound was overwhelming, debris slamming against metal, the hiss of current, the distant crack of thunder rolling closer. I remember yelling at no one, just to hear my own voice over the chaos. The RV shifted again, tilted. That was my cue to climb higher ground. I scrambled up the nearest rock ledge, gripping slick sandstone, heart hammering. Behind me, my home, my life on wheels, lurched as the floodwater surged through its undercarriage. For a moment, I thought it would hold. Then it moved, slowly at first, then faster, dragged downstream like it weighed nothing. There's a special kind of silence that follows loss. Standing there, soaked, flashlight flickering, I watched my RV disappear into the blackness below. The desert swallowed it whole. The rain kept falling, heavier now, cold needles against my skin. Every sound echoed wrong, too close, too hollow, like the canyon was speaking back. I'd lost my shelter, my supplies, my connection to the world. But the strange thing was, fear didn't feel like panic anymore. It felt like clarity, pure, sharp animal awareness. I climbed higher, searching for a ledge above the waterline. Each step was a negotiation with gravity. My hands bled where the rock tore skin, but pain felt distant, meaningless. All I could think was, get higher, get dry, stay alive. Lightning split the sky, revealing the canyon below, a brown torrent snaking through the land, shining with the reflection of distant firelight. Except there shouldn't have been fire. I saw a glow-up river, faint and orange, flickering like campfire light. For a moment, hope sparked. Maybe another camper had made it. Maybe there was help. But as I squinted through the rain, the light didn't move or fade. It just pulsed like it was breathing. I called out, my voice raw. "Hey, up here!" Nothing answered but the echo, stretched and wrong, as if the canyon repeated my words too slowly. I told myself exhaustion was playing tricks, that I was seeing lightning reflection. But deep down, I felt watched. The glow stayed steady, hovering near a bend in the canyon. It reminded me of stories old locals used to tell about the Lantern Man, a ghost that appeared before floods to warn travelers. I never believed in it. I still don't think I do. But that night, part of me wondered. Hours passed. The rain softened to drizzle, then mist. My body shook with cold, clothes plastered against skin. I found a shallow overhang to crawl beneath, my flashlight dead, my breath fogging the air. The silence returned, too deep, too complete, and I realized I could hear the river settling, its fury spent. But every few minutes, something shifted in the dark. A stone sliding, a splash, a low sound that wasn't wind. When dawn came, it wasn't sunlight that woke me. It was silence so thick it felt alive. The flood had receded, leaving behind a world rearranged. Trees uprooted, rocks scattered, the wash now a scar cutting through red earth. My RV was gone, just tire tracks leading nowhere. I climbed down slowly, feet sinking in mud that still glistened with trapped water. I should have felt grief, but what I felt instead was awe, raw, humbling awe for how fragile we really are. Then I saw something half buried near the wash edge. Metal, white. The side panel of my RV. I dug it out with my hands, fingers shaking, and there, caught in the torn aluminum, was my own reflection. Distorted, rippled, unrecognizable. My face looked older. My eyes looked like someone else's. That was when I realized the wilderness doesn't just test you physically. It tests your sense of who you are when everything you control is stripped away. That morning, I started walking east toward where I thought the main road might be. The air smelled clean, like new beginnings, but beneath it was something heavier, the scent of earth freshly broken open. I didn't know if I'd make it out by nightfall. I didn't know if I'd ever find what was left of my RV. But I did know this. Survival isn't about strength or preparation. It's about humility. The moment you stop fighting nature and start listening to it. And that day, walking barefoot through the drying mud, I began to understand that survival isn't just living through something. It's learning what it takes not to lose yourself to it. The mud made every step a negotiation. My boots had been swept away in the flood, and each footprint I left sank deep into the wet clay, filling slowly with brown water that reflected the rising sun. My clothes were stiff with dried silt, and every movement scraped my skin raw. I told myself to keep walking east. That was the direction of the dirt road, and maybe, if I was lucky, another traveler. But luck felt like something I'd used up hours ago. The flood had erased everything familiar. Landmarks I thought I'd recognized, the twin boulders, the crooked juniper, were gone or buried. The canyon was rearranged as if the desert had decided to start over. I moved along the edge of the wash, my eyes scanning for any sign of debris from my RV. Food, tools, anything. The silence after disaster is never total. It hums with little sounds, stones shifting, distant drips, the crackle of drying mud. It's the sound of nature reclaiming what it lost. Around mid-morning, I found a tangle of wreckage wedged between two rocks, a door frame, my water jug miraculously intact, and beside it, my old hiking pack. I knelt, trembling, and unzipped it. The contents were soaked but recognizable. A flashlight, flares, a half-melted chocolate bar, and my emergency radio. The batteries were swollen, ruined. Still, just touching something from before the storm felt like remembering who I was again. I drank sparingly from the jug, the water gritty but cold, and looked downstream. The wash twisted eastward toward narrower canyons that vanished into shadow. Somewhere down there, I thought I saw movement, a shape slipping between rocks. My heart clenched, but I couldn't tell if it was human or animal, probably a coyote scavenging after the flood. Still, the way it moved, slow, deliberate, made me uneasy. "Hey!" I called out. My voice bounced off the canyon walls. No answer. I waited, listening. Nothing. That's when I started hearing the clicking, soft at first, like two stones tapping together. Then again, a little closer. Tap, tap. Pause. Tap. It wasn't rhythmic like an echo. It was purposeful, cautious, the kind of sound something makes when it's listening to see if you respond. I spun in a slow circle, eyes searching the canyon rim. Nothing moved, but the sound persisted, sometimes behind me, sometimes ahead. Fear in the wilderness doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in through logic. First you tell yourself it's a bird, then wind, then maybe a branch shifting. But there comes a moment when all those explanations feel smaller than the sound itself. I pressed on, faster. The sun climbed higher, turning the mud to cracked mosaics under my feet. The clicking followed, matching my pace. Every so often it stopped, long enough for me to think it was gone, then started again, always the same distance behind. By noon, I reached a stretch of canyon where the walls narrowed so tight I could touch both sides. The air there was different, thicker, damper, carrying the smell of moss and rot. I stepped carefully, the mud now cool and slick beneath me. Then I saw something ahead that made my stomach twist. Footprints. Not mine. These were larger, deeper, pressed into the mud like someone had passed through not long before. Bare feet, the toes splayed wide, almost animal, but unmistakably human. They led forward into the gloom. I knelt to look closer and felt my pulse thudding in my ears. Each print was filled with water, clear enough to see small ripples forming, as if something had just moved through. I straightened and listened. Nothing. Just that deep, suffocating quiet. My rational mind was unraveling. Maybe another survivor? Maybe someone who'd camped upstream and got caught too? But the footprints weren't heading away from the flood. They were coming toward it. Still, the human need for contact overrode fear. I followed them. The canyon opened slightly into a clearing littered with debris, tree branches, shredded tarps, twisted metal. My RV's ladder was there, bent in half. And there, half buried in the sand, was something that froze me mid-step. My lantern. It was still lit. The flame inside burned low, flickering in the faint breeze. I hadn't used it since the night before. It should have drowned hours ago. I crouched, staring at it, heart pounding. The light cast thin reflections across the puddles, reflections that seemed to waver into shapes. Faces, almost. My own, then others, too many to count, shifting like water. The clicking started again, closer now. I turned, scanning the canyon rim, and for a split second I saw movement, a figure standing above, against the sunlight. Human shape, tall, motionless, watching. The glare blinded me before I could see its face. When my eyes adjusted, it was gone. I grabbed the lantern and kept walking. Not running. Just walking, steady, controlled. That's the trick of survival. You keep moving, even when your mind wants to curl up and wait for daylight. The canyon widened again, opening into a basin filled with shallow pools. The flood had created a temporary lake, glistening beneath the afternoon sun. And at the far edge of it, half submerged in mud, was the roof of my RV. My heart leapt. I ran toward it, splashing through knee-deep water, slipping, catching myself on branches. When I reached it, I dropped to my knees and tore open the side door. Inside smelled like gasoline, mud, and rot. Everything was upended, drawers hanging open, cushions soaked. But my emergency kit was still strapped under the bed. Inside were dry clothes sealed in plastic, a flare gun, and a backup flashlight. For the first time since the storm began, I felt hope. Then, as I turned to climb out, something brushed my ankle. It wasn't water. It was firm. Fingers. I jerked back instinctively, slamming against the wall. My flashlight beam cut across the murky water at the base of the RV. Nothing, just ripples spreading outward. I waited, breath held, muscles trembling. The silence pressed in. Then came that sound again. Tap, tap, right against the metal of the RV's hull. I scrambled out, slipping in the mud, my heart hammering so hard it hurt. I fired a flare into the air, its red light bursting above the canyon, casting everything in blood color. For a moment, the world was silent again. Then, from across the basin, something rose from the water, slowly, impossibly tall, its outline bending in the red glow. I ran. Branches tore at my arms, rocks cut my feet, but I didn't stop. I didn't dare look back. The clicking grew louder behind me, like dry bones knocking together. I followed the narrow wash uphill, lungs burning, until I reached higher ground. When the flare faded, so did the noise. By the time the sun began to dip, I'd found a ledge overlooking the canyon. The air was cooler now, cleaner. Below me, the floodplain stretched like a wound across the desert. I sat there shaking, the flare gun still warm in my hands, the lantern flickering beside me. That's when I realized something strange. The lantern's flame didn't reflect on the wet rock beside me. No shadow, no light bounce. It just burned, self-contained, like it existed in its own small world. And even stranger, every time the wind blew, it didn't flicker outward. It bent inward toward the flame. That night I didn't sleep. I kept my back to the rock wall and watched the horizon. The flood had passed, the storm was gone, and yet the wilderness didn't feel still. It felt like it was waiting to see if I'd learned what it was trying to teach me. By nightfall, the canyon had turned to ink. The stars were out, but their light barely reached me. The air felt thick, wet with the ghost of the flood that had torn through hours earlier. I sat with my back against the rock wall, my flare gun across my lap, the lantern still burning beside me, its strange, inward-drawing flame shrinking whenever I looked directly at it. Every sound out there felt sharpened. The faint pop of cooling stone, the slow drip of water finding new paths through the canyon. Once or twice, something shifted in the dark, subtle, heavy, like a foot dragging through sand. I told myself it was runoff, maybe loose debris rolling down a slope, but I didn't believe that. Not anymore. The wilderness, after a storm, doesn't go quiet. It listens. I kept my eyes on the canyon floor below, but in that half-light, it felt like the land itself was breathing, expanding and contracting like alive beneath the surface. I started to wonder if the flood hadn't just rearranged the land physically, but spiritually, as if it had shaken loose things buried too long. It wasn't just fear keeping me awake, it was the need to stay rational, to understand what had happened. Flash floods form when storms dump water upstream, miles away. You never see it coming until it's too late. Maybe what I saw before the flood, the pulsing light, the so-called lantern man, wasn't supernatural at all. Maybe it was lightning bouncing off the canyon or another camper with a lantern. But I'd seen that glow move against the rain. I'd seen it breathe. Still, fear distorts memory, and exhaustion rewrites it. I tried closing my eyes just for a second, but the sound that followed froze every muscle in my body, a hollow, uneven rhythm echoing from below. Click, click, click. It wasn't the same as before. This time it was slower, wet, like something tapping bone against stone. I turned the flashlight toward the edge, sweeping the canyon floor. The beam caught movement near the old flood line, small ripples circling outward, spreading across a shallow pool of standing water. But the ripples didn't stop. They widened, spreading in impossible patterns, like something beneath the surface was breathing again. I stood, every instinct screaming to climb higher, to get out of the canyon. But the ledge behind me curved upward into sheer wall, no path, no handholds. I was trapped until morning. I checked the flare gun, 2 shots left. My best defense was light and noise, and I was down to both. Then I heard footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate. Not on the canyon floor, on the ledge. They stopped just beyond the circle of my lantern's glow. I couldn't see who or what it was, but I could hear its breathing, a deep, wet rasp. My mind flashed through possibilities, an animal, a lost hiker, even a trick of the canyon's echo. But none of those breathed like that. None of those clicked. The sound came again, closer this time. Click. Click. I raised the flare gun. "Don't move," I yelled, voice cracking. "I've got light!" The breathing stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than sound. Even the wind held still. I felt something cold brush my arm, a movement of air that didn't belong. Then a whisper, so close it could have been inside my ear. "You shouldn't have stayed in the wash." I fired. The flare burst into red fire above us, painting the canyon in blood-colored light. For a second, I saw everything, the jagged stone, the shattered trees, the wash far below, and there, not 20 feet away, the figure. It was tall, skin the color of clay, streaked with mud like veins, its head tilted, eyes reflecting red like an animal caught in a beam, and its mouth was wrong, too wide, too still. It didn't move when it spoke again. The water remembers. Then the light died. I scrambled backward, my boots slipping against slick rock. The lantern toppled, the flame pulling inward one last time before vanishing entirely. Everything went black. I could hear my heartbeat, my ragged breath, and faintly beneath it that clicking, moving away now, echoing down the canyon until it was gone. I stayed awake the rest of the night, shaking, gripping the flare gun like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. The moment dawn broke, I was already climbing. The climb took hours. Every muscle ached, my fingers raw from scraping against stone, but the sun meant safety, or at least the illusion of it. I pulled myself over the final ledge just as the morning wind swept through, drying the sweat on my face. From up there, the canyon stretched endlessly, a scar through the desert. My RV, my things, my past, they were all somewhere down there, swallowed by mud and silence. For a long time, I just stood there, staring out at the emptiness. The world was too quiet. No birds, no insects, not even wind through the sagebrush. Just stillness, heavy and unnatural. I told myself it was because of the flood that the storm had driven life away, but deep down, I knew better. Some places don't want to be remembered. By midday, I found the dirt road, what was left of it. The flood had carved new gullies through the land, turning the once flat path into a maze of washed-out trenches. My legs wobbled with every step, but each mile felt like an act of defiance. Survival wasn't about getting out unscathed. It was about refusing to become part of the landscape that tried to erase you. When I finally saw tire tracks, fresh ones, I almost fell to my knees. Another traveler, maybe. I followed them until I reached a small rise overlooking a patch of desert scrub. There, parked crooked under the afternoon sun, was an old white pickup with a camper shell. A man stood beside it, hands on his hips, staring down into the canyon. I called out. My voice cracked, weak from dehydration, but he turned. "Hey!" I shouted again. "Up here!" He waved. Relief hit me so fast it felt like vertigo. I half ran, half stumbled toward him, my mind already rehearsing what I'd say, about the flood, about losing everything, about the figure in the dark that shouldn't have been real. When I reached him, he looked me over quietly. His eyes were pale blue, almost colorless, his skin weathered like he'd lived out here his whole life. "Rough night?" he asked. His voice was calm, too calm. "You could say that," I managed. "Flash flood. Lost my rig, nearly didn't make it out." He nodded, gaze fixed on the canyon. "Yeah, happens fast out here." Then after a pause, "You camped down in the wash?" "Yeah," I said, still catching my breath. "Didn't look dangerous when I parked." He gave a slow, measured nod like he'd heard it before. "Nobody ever thinks it does, till it starts talking." I froze. "Talking?" He looked at me then, finally meeting my eyes. There was no humor in his face, no disbelief, just the kind of knowing that only comes from experience. "Water's old here," he said quietly. "Older than the rock. Sometimes it remembers voices, sometimes it repeats them. And sometimes," he added, his tone dropping lower, "it keeps them." The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of rain again. I looked back toward the canyon, the memory of the whisper still alive in my ears. "You shouldn't have stayed in the wash." The man reached into his truck bed and pulled out a canteen, handing it to me. "You best head east. Road's rough, but it'll get you back to the highway. And if you camp again..." He looked at the horizon where thunderheads were already building. "Never trust a dry riverbed." I nodded, too tired to speak. As I started walking, I turned once more to thank him, but he was already climbing into his truck. The engine roared to life, then cut out again, like it hadn't caught. When I blinked, the truck was gone. No sound of tires, no dust trail, just empty desert. For a long while, I stood there alone, holding the canteen. The metal was cold. Inside, the water sloshed faintly, clear, pure. But when I uncapped it and brought it to my lips, I smelled the faintest trace of mud and something else. The scent of a lantern flame that shouldn't still be burning. The road was barely a road anymore, just a strip of cracked clay and gravel that looked like it had been clawed apart by giants. Every few hundred feet, I'd see signs of where the flood had touched, leaving behind twisted branches, driftwood, and unrecognizable scraps of someone's life. My body felt mechanical now. One foot, then the other. Breath in, breath out. Pain had dulled into a steady pulse at the edge of consciousness. The sun was merciless. My skin stung with every bead of sweat that rolled down. I'd wrapped an old flannel around my head for shade, but it didn't help much. The canteen from the stranger, if that's what he really was, hung heavy at my side. I still hadn't drunk from it. I didn't trust what I'd smelled in that water. Still, I carried it because it was all I had left of the encounter. Proof, maybe, that I wasn't hallucinating. By early afternoon, the road curved upward and out of the canyon system and into higher desert. From the ridge, I could see miles of red and gold land rolling out to the horizon. Somewhere out there was Highway 24, the thread that would lead me back to civilization. I started down the slope, steady but cautious. The mud was drying fast, cracking open into jagged veins. That's when I noticed something strange. There were tire tracks on the slope, deep ones, fresh. They belonged to the same pickup I'd seen hours ago. The treads matched perfectly. But they didn't lead away from where I'd been. They led toward it. The tracks ended abruptly at a patch of stone, like the truck had rolled forward and vanished. No skid marks, no sign of turning around. Just gone. I crouched there, staring at the broken ends of the tire marks, my pulse thudding in my ears. Every rational thought I had tried to explain it. Maybe the flood had washed the rest away. Maybe the wind filled them in. But the wind doesn't erase tire tracks in minutes. I turned and looked back toward the canyon. A shimmer of heat rippled over the horizon, And for a moment, I thought I saw the shape of the truck again, parked exactly where I'd found it earlier, a white silhouette against the dust. Then the mirage bent and the shape dissolved. That's when I finally drank. I couldn't take it anymore. The dryness in my throat, the metallic taste of dust in my mouth. I unscrewed the canteen and took a small sip. The water was cool, unnaturally cool for this heat. Too clean. It didn't taste of metal or mud. It tasted empty, like nothing at all. But after a few gulps, I started to feel better. My muscles loosened, my heartbeat steadied. The heat didn't seem so harsh. My thoughts cleared. Maybe I'd just been imagining everything. The figure, the whisper, the clicking. Maybe the flood had broken more than the land. Maybe it had cracked open my sanity for a while. The more I walked, the more I believed that story. It's amazing what the mind will do to keep itself safe. By late afternoon, I saw it. A glint of metal in the distance, straight lines cutting across the earth. The highway. The sight almost brought me to tears. Civilization. Life. Proof that this nightmare had boundaries. I stumbled toward it, my legs rubbery, my body light. But as I got closer, something about the road felt wrong. It looked too new. Fresh asphalt, uncracked, black, and perfect. There were no traffic lines, no signs, no marks of wear. Just a black ribbon stretching endlessly in both directions. And yet, I could hear the faint hum of engines somewhere far away. Cars I couldn't see. I stepped onto it. The heat radiating from the surface burned through my socks, but I didn't care. I just started walking east, following the road's gentle curve. Every few minutes, I thought I saw motion up ahead. Headlights, maybe, but they never got closer. The hum of traffic came and went, faint and ghostly, like the world was mimicking civilization rather than containing it. The sun began to dip behind the mesas and the sky turned a bruised violet. Shadows stretched long across the desert. I kept walking, afraid to stop. I'd lost too much already. My RV, my direction, my certainty of what was real. I wasn't going to lose my will. But then I saw it. Up ahead, pulled off to the shoulder, was a white pickup truck with a camper shell. I slowed, my stomach twisted. It was parked facing west this time, its headlights off, its outline unmoving in the twilight. The same one, I was sure of it. Every dent, every contour matched what I'd seen before. I called out, voice cracking, "Hey, it's me! You remember? From the canyon." No response. I approached slowly, my boots crunching gravel. The closer I got, the colder the air felt, like the temperature dropped around that truck alone. The smell hit next, wet earth, old rain, and that same faint trace of lantern smoke. My throat went dry again. The driver's side door was open. The cab was empty, but the canteen, the one he'd given me, was sitting on the seat. My fingers tightened around the strap of the one at my hip. I lifted it, turned it over. Identical. Same dents, same cap, the same water sloshing inside. I backed away, every instinct screaming that something was wrong. The truck's engine ticked quietly like it had just been turned off. I scanned the ground, no footprints, no signs of anyone leaving or arriving, just my own, circling it. Then, from the open door, a voice spoke. "You found the road." I froze. It was his voice, the same calm, unhurried tone as before, but there was no one in sight. The cab was empty, the desert silent. "Keep walking east," it said softly. "Don't stop this time." I wanted to run, but something in the voice wasn't threatening. It was sorrowful, almost pleading, like it wasn't warning me, but begging me to listen. And then it said something that stopped my heart cold. "You left me in the water." I dropped the canteen. It hit the road and burst open, not with water, but with mud, thick, red, and glistening. It spilled across the asphalt in a slow crawl, forming patterns that look almost like words. The smell was overwhelming. Iron and rot, the scent of the flood. I staggered backward, tripping over gravel, eyes burning. When I looked up again, the truck was gone. No sound of an engine, no dust trail, no evidence it had ever been there. Just the mud on the road, drying fast under the evening air. I didn't wait. I ran. The road stretched endlessly, the stars overhead spinning in a blur. My body screamed for rest, but every time I slowed, I heard it, the faint clicking far behind me. It wasn't loud anymore. It didn't chase. It just followed like it was keeping pace with my heartbeat. I ran until I saw lights ahead. Real lights this time. Fluorescent, steady, humming. A gas station. The first sign of civilization since the storm. The parking lot was empty, except for a single rusted RV under a flickering lamp. My legs nearly gave out when I reached the door. A bell rang as I stepped inside. The place smelled of old coffee and dust. A man stood behind the counter, leaning on an old register, flipping through a magazine. He looked up at me and froze. "You okay, buddy?" he asked. I nodded weakly. "Flash flood. Lost my RV back in the swell. Just need a phone." He gestured toward a payphone near the window. "Haven't seen a good rain here in months," he said. "You must have been deep out there." I tried to smile, but my lips cracked. "Yeah," I murmured. "Too deep." He poured me a cup of coffee, slid it across the counter. I took it, hands shaking. "You were lucky," he said. "Had a couple folks try camping out in those washes last year. Never found their rigs." "Never found them?" I asked, voice thin. He shook his head. "Just debris. And sometimes after a storm, people say they see lights down there, like lanterns, moving against the wind." My stomach turned. I looked down into the coffee cup and saw mud swirling at the bottom. A faint shimmer, a ripple spreading outward. My reflection wavered, and for a moment it wasn't mine. It was his. The man from the canyon. Pale eyes, still mouth. The bell above the door rang again behind me, though no one had entered. When I turned back to the counter, the clerk was gone. The lights flickered once, twice, and then the whole gas station went dark. Outside, in the reflection of the window, I saw it again, the faint orange glow of a lantern burning steadily in the rain that wasn't falling. And somewhere, carried on the wind that shouldn't have existed, a voice I knew too well whispered, "The water remembers." The darkness inside that gas station felt too deep for something built by men. It swallowed the hum of the lights, the steady tick of the wall clock, the faint hiss of the coffee pot cooling. I stood there in the silence, the cup trembling in my hands, the mud inside it still swirling long after it should have settled. My reflection twisted in the surface. My eyes were mine, but the rest of my face wasn't. Outside, the world had changed color. The asphalt shimmered with a sheen of water, though no rain fell. The neon sign above the station buzzed weakly, flickering between open and nothing. The light reflecting off a thin film that coated everything. The windows, the pumps, the air itself. It looked like the desert was breathing again, like the flood had only pretended to end. I should have run. But something in me, maybe exhaustion, maybe curiosity, maybe the voice that still whispered from the back of my skull, told me to step outside. The moment I did, the sound hit me. A low, endless rush. Not wind, not thunder. Water. I turned toward the horizon and my stomach dropped. The desert was gone. In its place, an endless river stretched as far as I could see, black and glinting under the neon light. The road disappeared into it like it had never existed. And there, out on the surface, floating lazily in the current, was my RV, the same scratches on the side, the same bent ladder. Its lights flickered dimly inside, as if the battery still had a heartbeat. The water lapped quietly against the pumps. "Eli," a voice called from within it. I froze. It wasn't the stranger's voice this time. It was mine. It came again, closer now, like the sound traveled not through air, but through the water itself. "You left me behind." I stepped backward, nearly tripping over the curb. My boots splashed in shallow puddles that hadn't been there a moment before. The gas station lights flickered out completely, leaving only the faint orange glow of my lantern, now sitting in the middle of the road, upright, burning steady as ever. "You shouldn't have stayed in the wash." The whisper came from everywhere, the air, the ground, the water, overlapping into something like a memory echoing back at me. "I tried to leave," I said, my voice trembling. "I did everything right. But the sound cut me off. Click, click, click. The tapping came from inside the RV, floating out there in the water. Then I saw movement behind the windshield, a hand pressing up against the glass from within. Mud-streaked. My hand. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." The water surged closer, lapping at my boots, soaking through the seams. I turned to run back inside the station, but the doorway was gone, replaced by a smooth wall of concrete like the building had sealed itself shut. The windows now reflected only darkness. No interior, no clerk, no shelves. Just me, and behind me, a shape walking slowly across the water. It wasn't floating, it wasn't swimming, it was walking, each step sending concentric ripples outward. I could see it now in the lantern light, tall, human-shaped, its skin cracked and glistening like dried riverbed clay. And where its eyes should have been, water leaked constantly, streaming down its face, carving new paths through the mud. I backed away, every breath a gasp of disbelief and exhaustion. You're not real. It tilted its head, the same slow, deliberate motion I'd seen from the canyon rim. I am what you left, it said in my voice. Its words came out thick and bubbling, like air escaping from a submerged mouth. You crawled out, it continued, but part of you didn't. The river kept what it wanted. I stumbled backward into the middle of the road. The lantern flared suddenly, its flame bending inward again, shrinking into a sharp point before erupting outward in a burst of orange light. The creature flinched, or maybe mimicked the motion of fear, its arms twitching at strange angles. The light flickered once more, and in that split second, I saw what surrounded me. The road wasn't dry anymore. It stretched endlessly in both directions, submerged under a thin layer of water that reflected 1,000 small flames. Lanterns, floating for miles, drifting silently, and each one holding a faint shadow beneath it. Voices whispered from them, a chorus of names. Some I didn't know, some I recognized, and one of them, the closest, whispered mine. I fired the last flare. The light soared up, white-hot, burning against the sky that wasn't a sky anymore, but a moving ceiling of black water. The creature stopped, its body glowing briefly in the flare's reflection. Its face was collapsing in on itself, skin cracking, eyes hollow. But its voice stayed calm. You think you survived. You didn't. You just changed places. The flare fell into the water and hissed out. The silence that followed was worse than the flood, worse than the night in the canyon. Because in that silence I could hear the faint drip of water behind me and realized it was coming from me. I looked down. My arms were streaked with mud that hadn't been there seconds before. My reflection in the lantern's glow was wrong again. My skin darker, wet, like river clay drying in patches. My pupils had gone pale. I staggered backwards, screaming at the thing, at myself, at the sky. What are you? What do you want? Its voice came again, soft, echoing, to be whole. Then it stepped forward, one last stride, and reached out. Its hand met mine, fingers cold, rough, and too familiar. The world blurred. The lanterns blinked out. The water folded upwards, swallowing everything in reverse. Gas station, road, sky, until there was nothing but the sound of running water. When I woke, I was standing beside a dirt road under the morning sun. My RV sat nearby, perfectly upright, dry as bone, the windshield gleaming with dew. The desert was silent, untouched. No flood, no mud, just stillness. I walked up to it, heart hammering. Everything was there. My gear, my radio, even the coffee mug still half full. It was like the storm had never happened. For a moment, I thought maybe I dreamed it all. A fever, dehydration, trauma. I climbed inside and sat behind the wheel. The seat was warm from the sun. I started the engine. It turned over easily. But then I noticed the lantern sitting on the dashboard, still burning. And when I looked in the rearview mirror, I didn't see the road behind me. I saw water. Endless, black, moving water. I reached up to touch my face and felt the grit of dried clay under my skin. My heartbeat didn't sound right anymore. It echoed, hollow, like it came from beneath the surface. I should have driven away. I should have left it all behind. But as the RV rolled forward, I realized the reflection in the mirror wasn't following me. It was leading. I don't know how long I've been driving now. The road never ends. The horizon never changes. Sometimes when the sun sets, I see lights flickering along the canyon rim, and I hear the faint sound of clicking from somewhere under the floorboards. I tell myself it's just the suspension, just the old Winnebago settling. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I hear the flood again, rushing through the walls, calling my name, And when I open them, there's water on the windshield. Always water. They say flash floods happen fast without warning. They never tell you some don't end. Some just move inside you and wait. So if you ever find yourself camping out in the wilderness and the rain starts to whisper on your roof, remember what I learned too late. Never sleep near a dry wash. Never ignore the first sound of distant thunder. And if you ever see a lantern still burning after the rain, don't follow it, because sometimes survival isn't what saves you. It's what keeps you from realizing you didn't survive at all. I've always loved the quiet before nightfall, the soft hum of insects, the distant hiss of wind through pines, and that strange moment when light seems to hold its breath. My name's Evan Lark, I'm 34, and I've spent the better part of my life chasing moments like that across Oregon's forests. I live in my old Volkswagen Westphalia, a faded yellow one from the late 70s. Most people see it as nostalgia on wheels, but to me, it's something else entirely. An anchor in the wilderness, a reminder that I can always pull over, park, and find peace. At least, that's what I used to believe before I found the campground that never closes. I'd been driving along the Mackenzie River Highway, heading east toward the Cascades, trying to outrun a late August storm. The plan was simple: find a quiet, primitive campsite by the water, cook dinner, maybe photograph the dusky sky before rain moved in. The forests there are thick. Douglas fir and cedar so dense they make the daylight feel heavier. You drive long stretches without seeing another car, and the world narrows to your headlights, the trees, and the winding road ahead. Around 7 that evening, I saw a wooden sign I didn't recognize. It wasn't on my map. The letters were burned into the wood, worn but legible. Stillwater Campground, open all seasons. That last part caught my attention. All seasons? I muttered. Out here, most sites close after Labor Day, or when the snow blocks the roads. But the gate was open, and the rain was coming fast. The road into Stillwater was narrow and slick, lined with moss-covered stones and ferns taller than my waist. The forest pressed in on both sides like a tunnel, the light dimming, even though sunset hadn't quite arrived. I remember thinking it looked like dusk had settled early, as if the place made its own time. When I reached the clearing, I counted about 12 sites, maybe more, all separated by dark pines and overgrown grass. But there were no other vehicles, no tents, no sound, just that heavy stillness that makes you feel like you've interrupted something ancient. I parked near the river. The air smelled of wet bark and cold metal. The sound of water was low and slow, like it was half asleep. I got out, stretched, and walked toward the edge of the current. That's when I noticed it. The light never changed. It was 7:30 by my watch, yet the world looked frozen between day and night. The sky wasn't darkening, it just stayed dim, like a room lit by dying fluorescent bulbs. I told myself it was the weather, the low clouds. I set up my small propane stove and started cooking. The smell of sizzling beans and smoke mixed with pine and rain, comforting and familiar. But every few minutes, I'd look up, expecting to see the first signs of twilight deepen. It never did. When I finished eating, I walked around with my flashlight, exploring the empty sites. Some had old fire rings, rusted and filled with damp ash. One had a half-burned log still sitting there, like someone had left in a hurry. At another site, I saw tire marks leading into the trees, as if a vehicle had turned sharply off-road and disappeared. I thought it was strange, but didn't dwell on it. I told myself it was just a deserted campground waiting for weekend travelers. Back in the van, I pulled the curtains closed and tried to sleep, but the light wouldn't fade. Even after midnight, it was that same dim twilight pressing through the fabric. No stars, no moon, no darkness. I tossed and turned, my body insisting it was night, my mind unsure. At some point, I heard it, the sound that broke the stillness. A knock. 3 soft, hollow knocks against the side of my van. I froze, holding my breath. It wasn't an animal. It was too precise. I reached for my flashlight and waited. Nothing. No footsteps, no voices, just the faint hiss of the river and the knocking echoing in my chest. After what felt like an hour, I forced myself to look outside. No one. but the ground around the van was disturbed. Small, circular impressions in the mud, almost like someone had been standing barefoot. I should have packed up right then, but something about the air felt wrong. It wasn't just fear, it was like the place itself didn't want me to leave. My headlights wouldn't turn on. Neither would the dash lights. The engine wouldn't crank. The battery, which I'd replaced 2 weeks earlier, was dead silent. That endless dusk outside flickered faintly, and I swear the trees seemed to shift. The pines looked taller, closer. My reflection in the window seemed delayed by a fraction of a second, like the light around me was thickening. I sat there until the stillness became unbearable. Then I stepped outside. The air felt heavier, cooler, damp in a way that clung to my skin. The river's sound had changed, now faster, harsher, like rushing water in a canyon. I aimed my flashlight across the current, and that's when I saw the campfire. A faint orange glow flickered between trees across the river. It was far, but clear. There was movement, figures around it like silhouettes sitting close together. Relief surged through me. Other campers, I thought. Maybe they had jumper cables, maybe they could help. I waved my flashlight and shouted, but no one responded. The figures didn't move, didn't even look up. They just sat, perfectly still, around that flickering light. Something about that stillness made my stomach tighten. The beam of my flashlight caught something pale near the water's edge. Bones, maybe? I blinked hard, thinking my eyes were playing tricks, but the shapes stayed. The moment I took a step forward, the fire on the far bank dimmed, then flared, and I heard it. Another knock, this time from behind me, coming from the van again. I turned fast, the beam shaking in my hand. The driver's door was open. I hadn't left it that way. I ran back, scanning inside. Nothing was missing. Nothing moved. But on the dashboard, there was something new. A map folded neatly, the kind that comes from old ranger stations. Across the top, in faded red ink, were the words, Stillwater Campground operational all hours. Below that, scrawled in pencil, were smaller words, Don't let it close. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the flashlight until my fingers cramped, watching the same dim sky press against the glass. No birds sang, no wind shifted. It was a world locked in perpetual dusk, and I could feel it watching me, waiting for me to forget what time was. By morning, if it was morning, I realized something terrifying. The clock on my dashboard hadn't moved. My watch was stuck at 12:17. My phone had no signal, no time update, nothing. I opened the curtains, and outside, the light was identical to the night before. The campground had never changed. It was as if I'd parked inside a moment that refused to end. And that's when the real knocking began. I stopped counting after the 7th knock. They came in uneven bursts, sometimes 3, sometimes 5, always spaced just far enough apart to keep me from knowing when the next would come. I kept thinking it had stopped, that maybe it was the river echoing or the van's metal cooling in the damp air. But each time I exhaled, another knock would answer. I told myself to stay calm, breathe, keep your head clear. But that's when I realized something that made my stomach twist. The knocks weren't coming from outside anymore. They were coming from underneath the van. I crouched slowly, peering through the front windshield toward the river. The dim orange glow from the far bank was gone. The trees were darker now, like silhouettes painted against a wall of fog. The sound of the river seemed to pulse, like it was breathing. I turned the flashlight toward the floor and leaned down. The van rocked slightly. I felt the vibration through the soles of my feet. Then came a sound I'll never forget, a soft dragging, like wet fabric being pulled across gravel. I grabbed the flashlight and threw open the door, half expecting to find an animal. The beam cut through a veil of mist rolling low to the ground. Nothing moved. The air smelled wrong, metallic and sharp, almost like burnt wire mixed with cold rain. I crouched low, trying to see beneath the van, but the mist pooled thick around the tires. I should have gone back inside, locked the doors, waited for daylight, if daylight even existed there. But something about that dragging sound pulled at me, like it wanted me to look closer. I took one slow step forward, then another, until my knees touched the damp ground. The earth was soft, almost spongy. I aimed the light beneath the van and saw feet. Bare, mud-covered feet. They were facing away from me, ankles disappearing under the chassis, motionless except for the slightest twitch, like a reflex. My breath caught. I stumbled backward, my shoulder hitting the doorframe. "Hey!" I shouted, though my voice cracked halfway through the word. The feet didn't move. And then, as if answering, came that same sound from the other side of the van, dragging, wet, slow. I ran around to the passenger side, but there was nothing there, only deep footprints leading toward the tree line, vanishing into the mist. The air seemed to hum, a low static that made my teeth ache. I could feel the vibration in my jaw. That was when I decided I needed to leave. I jumped into the driver's seat and turned the key again and again, but the engine only groaned. The battery light flickered once, then died. The headlights refused to come on. I hit the dash with my palm once, twice. "Come on!" I shouted. My voice echoed strangely, like the sound was being swallowed halfway. And then I heard movement outside, slow, deliberate footsteps circling the van. They crunched lightly on gravel, dragging just enough to let me know whoever, or whatever it was, wasn't in a hurry. I clutched the flashlight like a weapon and tried to steady my breathing. The knocking started again, softer now, coming from the windows this time, from the back, from the side, from everywhere. Something in me broke then. Panic took over. I burst out the door and ran toward the center of the campground, flashlight beam swinging wildly over the empty sites. The air felt thick, heavy, pressing down with every breath. I shouted into the dusk, "Who's out there?" No answer, just the hiss of the river. Then I saw it, the faint light again, deeper in the woods. Not across the river this time, but among the trees to my right. It flickered like a lantern, warm and steady. I don't know why, but I ran toward it. I think I just needed to see another human face, to prove the world still existed beyond this frozen dusk. The forest swallowed me quickly. The trees here were ancient, their trunks massive and slick with moss. The ground dipped in strange patterns, soft and uneven, like walking over old graves. The light ahead bobbed once, then held still. When I reached it, I realized it wasn't a lantern. It was a campfire, but one that didn't seem to burn right. The flames moved, but they didn't make sound. No crackle, no hiss, just a silent orange shimmer that gave off no heat. Around it were 5 chairs, all wooden, all empty, and on the ground beside them lay what looked like a folded jacket. I stepped closer and my stomach turned when I saw the name stitched on the fabric, E-Lark. My name. The same faded jacket I'd lost 3 years earlier at a campsite near Mount Hood. I backed away, shaking my head, whispering, "No, no." I dropped the flashlight. The beam rolled across the dirt and caught something else, a metal post almost buried with a number carved into it. I brushed the dirt away. It read Site 7. That was my site, the one I'd parked at. Only now I was standing in it. The air shimmered like heat mirage, and I heard the sound of my own van door slamming shut behind me, except it was coming from deeper in the forest, as if the world had folded in on itself. I stumbled backward, breathing hard, trying to orient myself. My phone buzzed suddenly in my pocket, and I nearly dropped it in shock. The screen lit up with a single message, no number attached. "If you see them, don't look away." I turned slowly, every nerve in my body screaming not to. At first, I thought it was the trees again, just shadows. But then they moved. 5 figures standing where the chairs were, silhouettes against that motionless flame. They were tall, still, their heads tilted as if studying me. No faces, just dark shapes in that endless, dull light. One stepped forward. The movement was wrong, smooth, silent, like a reflection sliding across glass. My flashlight flickered and died. I ran. Branches whipped my face, my breath tearing from my chest as I stumbled through the undergrowth. The forest blurred around me. It all looked the same. No landmarks, no trail, just that awful in-between light that made every direction look identical. I don't remember falling, only the impact when I hit the ground. My palms stung, my knees sank into the mud, and that was when I saw it. The same tire marks I'd noticed the night before, leading off the road and into the trees. only now I could see where they ended. An old, half-buried Volkswagen camper. Same model as mine, same yellow paint, now flaking and sunken under roots. I walked closer in disbelief, heart pounding so hard it blurred the edges of my vision. The license plate was half covered in moss, but the numbers that remained made my skin crawl. It was mine, my plate. The door creaked open, and inside I saw my gear, my jacket, my photographs, my flashlight, still glowing faintly, even though it had died in my hand minutes earlier. And behind it all, faintly visible through the window, 5 dark figures stood at the tree line, watching. I don't know how long I stood there staring into that rusted van, watching my own life sealed inside it. The forest pressed closer with every second, silent except for the faint hiss of the river somewhere in the distance. My breath came out in sharp, uneven bursts, the kind that make you realize how loud panic really is when the world around you has gone still. I took a hesitant step toward the van. The ground squelched beneath my boots, soft like it was breathing. I reached for the handle. It was cold, colder than it should have been, like touching a stone pulled from deep water. I forced the door open, the hinges screeching into that endless dusk. The smell that came out wasn't rot or mold. It was something stranger, metallic, like rain on hot steel mixed with the sweetness of pine sap. The interior was almost identical to mine. Same plaid upholstery, same faded curtains. A few of my old things lay scattered across the seat. A water bottle, my pocket knife, the notebook I kept travelogues in. The pages fluttered in the faint breeze that drifted through the trees. I picked it up. My handwriting filled the first few pages, dated 3 years ago, describing a solo trip through the Mackenzie River Highway. Then the entries changed. The dates stopped. The handwriting wasn't quite mine anymore. Shaky, uneven, the ink smeared in places. The last entry read, "It never closes. Don't stay when the sky stops changing." Something inside me cracked at that moment. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but part of me couldn't move. It felt like if I ran, the forest would just rearrange itself, and I'd end up right back here again, standing over the ghost of my own van. A faint sound broke the silence behind me. A woman's voice. Soft, distant, like a radio signal buried in static. "Evan." My heart lurched. No one had said my name since I arrived. I turned toward the sound, scanning the fog between the trees. For a moment I thought I saw her, just a blur of a figure in a pale jacket near the tree line. But the moment I blinked, she was gone. The voice came again, this time closer. "Evan, you shouldn't have stayed." I stumbled backward, the notebook dropping into the mud. The air grew colder. The shadows lengthened, though the light hadn't changed at all. I backed toward the van, and my shoulder hit the metal with a hollow thud. Then I heard something move inside the van. It wasn't loud, just a faint shuffle, like fabric brushing against the floor. Slowly, I turned my head toward the open door. The seat was empty, but the curtain hanging over the rear window was moving. Not from wind, from something beneath it. I reached for my flashlight instinctively, forgetting it was gone. My hand shook as I pulled the curtain aside. There was a figure sitting in the back seat. It looked like me. Paler, thinner. Eyes sunk deep into a face that had forgotten how to sleep. Its head tilted slightly, like studying its reflection. My breath caught, and I whispered, "What are you?" The figure smiled faintly, lips cracked and dry. Its voice was my own, but distant. "You didn't leave," it said. "You stayed to see how long dusk could last." I stumbled back, tripping over a root, my hand clawing at the dirt. My reflection, or whatever it was, didn't move, it just watched. Then, in one slow motion, it lifted its hand and pointed toward the trees behind me. I turned. The 5 dark figures stood closer now, almost within arm's reach. Their outlines flickered faintly, as if the air around them was warped by heat. They didn't walk, they drifted. One by one, their shapes began to dissolve, the dusk swallowing them whole until only their eyes remained, dim, colorless lights hovering in the mist. And then, all at once, the sound returned. The forest screamed to life, wind tearing through branches, the river roaring, trees groaning as if uprooting themselves. I dropped to my knees, covering my ears. The noise wasn't just sound, it was pressure, vibration, something that rattled my bones. A deep voice, no, not one voice, but many overlapping, whispered through it. Still water never closes. Still water never sleeps. I felt the ground shift beneath me. The mud sucked at my legs, dragging me downward. I grabbed at roots, at rocks, at anything solid, but they dissolved under my fingers like dust. I shouted into the noise, "What do you want from me?" The answer came, cold and certain. "You came to rest. You stay until you remember." The next thing I knew, I was running again. Through the trees, over the same uneven ground, the same tire ruts, the same broken path I'd already taken. The forest blurred around me like a looped film reel. I burst into the clearing, and there it was, my yellow van, clean, whole, headlights shining faintly against the dusk. The driver's door was open, the engine idling softly. I didn't stop to question it. I climbed inside, slammed the door, and pressed the gas. The van jolted forward. The headlights carved tunnels through the mist. I followed the dirt road back toward the highway, heart pounding so hard it drowned out the sound of the engine. The trees thinned, and for a split second I saw the open road ahead. The real road, the one that led out of Stillwater. Relief hit me like oxygen, but as soon as I hit the pavement, the sky shifted. The light flickered once, twice, and then I saw the sign. Stillwater Campground, open all seasons. I slammed the brakes, tires screeching on wet asphalt. I'd driven in a circle. Somehow I was right back where I'd started. The gate stood open. The same moss-covered stones lined the entrance. The same faint glow pulsed between the trees. I stared at it for what felt like hours, my hands gripping the wheel, trying to understand. The sky refused to darken or brighten, just that same eternal dusk. A single thought cut through the fog. Don't let it close. I remembered the message scrawled on the map. I didn't understand it before, but now I thought maybe I did. Maybe the campground wasn't a place. It was a moment. A sliver of time caught between sunset and nightfall. And the people who stayed too long became part of it. If I left, maybe the gate would close behind me forever. If I stayed, maybe I'd fade like the others. I turned off the engine and stepped outside. The air was still. The smell of pine and wet stone filled my lungs. Somewhere deep in the trees, I heard a faint voice calling my name again. Distant, almost kind. "Evan, it's all right now." It sounded like my mother's voice. She'd been gone for years. I stood there at the edge of the forest, torn between running and listening, between leaving and staying, between the world that moved and the one that stayed frozen forever in twilight. Then I saw something move in the corner of my eye, a faint shimmer near the sign like heat distortion. Inside it, for just a second, I saw myself driving away. Not the me standing there, but another version. Headlights fading down the highway, free. I took one step toward it. The air hummed louder, the light dimmed, the world felt like it was folding inward, and then everything went still again. When I opened my eyes again, the world had gone silent. Not the kind of silence you get when the wind stops or the insects sleep, but the deeper kind. The kind that feels like someone pressed pause on reality itself. The trees were frozen mid-sway, the river smooth as glass, the air thick enough to taste. I stood there, half in shadow, half in that strange glowing haze that was neither day nor night. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd died. Maybe that shimmer at the edge of the forest was the last thing I saw before crossing over. But the cold mud under my boots, the ache in my chest, the hammering of my heartbeat, they were all too real. I wasn't dead. I was somewhere else. My name felt small when I whispered it aloud. Evan Lark. The sound disappeared instantly, absorbed by the air. No echo, no return. It was as if the world didn't want to remember me. I looked back toward the sign. Stillwater Campground, open all seasons. Only now the letters were different. Fresh. The wood looked new, the carvings deep and sharp, and beneath it someone had etched a single word. Welcome. A chill rippled down my spine. I stepped forward slowly, scanning the ground, the trees, anything that could explain what had happened. But every path looked the same. Every tree was the same height. Every branch mirrored its neighbor. Even the river moved like it was caught in slow motion. repeating the same short current over and over again. That's when I noticed the figures again. They stood near the center of the campground, the same 5 I'd seen before, but they looked different now, clearer, almost human. Their faces were pale, faintly luminous, as if lit from beneath the skin. I could see their outlines trembling faintly in the still air. They weren't threatening anymore, just watching, waiting. One of them stepped forward, a woman with long dark hair tied behind her neck. Her clothes looked like something from decades ago, faded flannel, worn jeans, boots caked with mud. Her expression was calm, tired, but there was kindness in her eyes. "You stayed too long," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried in the air like wind through pine needles. I swallowed hard, forcing the words out. "Where am I?" She tilted her head slightly, studying me. "You're at Stillwater." "I know that. But what is it?" Her eyes flicked upward toward the motionless sky. "It's what happens when people can't let go of the road, when they mistake stillness for peace." Behind her, the other figures shifted slightly, their outlines rippling like reflections on moving water. "You weren't supposed to stay," she continued, "but you stopped moving. You waited for the day to change, and now you're part of it." "No," I said, "I didn't stop. I tried to leave." The road always leads back," she interrupted gently. "It's not a place, it's a moment. Everyone who comes here brings their own dusk." Her words hit something deep inside me. That quiet unease I'd felt when I first arrived wasn't about the campground at all. It was about me, about the way I'd been living, drifting from one empty highway to the next, convincing myself I was free when really I'd been running from everything I couldn't face. The woman took another step closer. The others followed, forming a faint half circle around me. "Stillwater doesn't trap you," she said softly. "It reflects you." "I don't understand," I whispered. She pointed past me. I turned and saw it again, my van. Parked just beyond the clearing, headlights off, doors shut tight. Through the windshield, I could see someone sitting in the driver's seat. Me, hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead. I took a step toward it, but she shook her head. "If you go back, you'll start again. The same drive, the same stop, the same dusk. It doesn't end until you do." The others nodded faintly, their faces unreadable. "So what do I do?" I asked. She smiled faintly, though her eyes looked sad. "You remember what you came here for, why you stopped moving." Her words echoed in my mind, why I stopped moving. It took me longer than I'd like to admit to realize it. I hadn't been camping for peace or adventure. I'd been escaping. From the job I left behind, from the people I let down, from a life that felt smaller every time I looked at it. The van wasn't freedom, it was avoidance, wrapped in nostalgia. I'd built my own dusk long before I reached this place. The woman's voice softened. "You can leave, Evan, but only if you know what you're leaving behind." I looked toward the van again. The reflection of myself inside didn't move. The forest around it shimmered, the edges beginning to blur. I thought of all the nights I'd spent chasing quiet, pretending it was peace. All the times I'd ignored the knock at the door, the voice of the world telling me to come back. I closed my eyes and took a slow breath. The air tasted cleaner now. When I opened them again, the woman and the figures were gone. The forest had gone still. For the first time, I could feel the temperature change. Warmth creeping through the air, the faint scent of morning dew. Above me, the sky lightened by a fraction, the first hint of dawn bleeding through the endless dusk. I walked toward the van. As I reached the door, I noticed something new on the ground. A small wooden sign, half buried in moss. I brushed the dirt away. It read, "Stillwater, closed for the season." I smiled despite the chill crawling up my neck. When I turned the key, the engine started on the first try. The dashboard clock blinked 6:12 a.m. The radio crackled to life with static, then caught a faint signal, some old folk song about rivers and roads and going home. I drove slowly down the gravel path, watching the trees part ahead of me. The light shifted, gradually this time. The fog thinned, the colors deepened, the world started to breathe again. When I reached the highway, the sign behind me was gone. Only an empty stretch of road remained. For the first few miles, I didn't look in the mirror. I didn't need to. I knew what I'd see. The same tired eyes, but clearer now, finally awake. Oregon's forests rolled by, bathed in gold. I pulled over once, stepped out, and looked at the horizon. It was moving again, slowly, beautifully. Maybe that's what Stillwater really was. Not a curse, not a ghost story, a reminder that you can't live in the moment forever. You have to let it pass, or it'll keep you there until you forget how to move forward. I started the van again and smiled faintly at the sound of the engine, rough and familiar. And as I drove away, I whispered to myself, "Keep moving." The words felt heavier than they should have, like a promise I finally meant. Behind me, far down the road, the forest faded into shadow again. And for just a second in the rearview mirror, I thought I saw that same wooden sign flash in the morning light, Stillwater Campground, open all seasons, before it vanished completely into the trees. And then, finally, the dusk lifted. The world was bright again. I used to think that the lonelier the place, the freer you felt. That's how I justified my first trip north, into the forgotten edge of Alaska, where abandoned mining towns sit half buried in snow and history. My name's Aaron Mitchell. I'm 47, a retired mechanic from Oregon who traded the noise of engines for the hum of the open road. My wife passed 5 years ago, and since then, my RV's been my only home. There's a kind of peace and solitude, but there's also something else, something I didn't understand until I parked in a ghost town called Kennecott. The drive up was brutal, long stretches of icy gravel, no service, no towns, just white tundra folding into mountains. My RV rattled like a tin can in a storm. I remember stopping on the one-lane bridge that crossed the Kennecott River and staring at what looked like a frozen shadow in the distance, an entire town still standing but hollowed out. The old red mill perched on the slope like a corpse refusing to decay, windows broken, wood scarred by wind and time. I told myself it was just history. People come here for that. Ghost towns, relics of the mining boom. But no one comes this deep in winter. No tours, no hikers, just me. And yet, when I stepped out into the cold, I heard something move. It wasn't wind. Wind has rhythm. This was staggered, uneven, deliberate, like boots sinking into snow. I froze, staring toward the mill, but saw only drifting flakes swirling through the dusk. The sound stopped when I stopped. That should have been my first warning, but I shrugged it off, convincing myself it was the creak of old timbers adjusting to cold. I parked near what must have been the general store. The windows were fogged from decades of frost, but I could still make out the shape of empty shelves and an old iron stove. I made a small fire outside the RV, cooked some canned beans, and watched the smoke rise into the violet twilight. The silence here wasn't like normal quiet. It pressed against you, made your thoughts sound louder. When I turned off my generator that night, the world disappeared into a blackness so absolute it felt like being swallowed. I didn't sleep well. At around 2 a.m., I woke up to a tapping sound, steady, gentle, metallic. My first thought was that ice was shifting on the roof. Then I realized it was too rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap. I turned on my lantern. The sound stopped immediately. I sat up, listening, heart hammering against the insulation. Then 3 soft taps again, this time on the side door. I froze. There was no light outside. My breath clouded in front of me. I wanted to look through the window, but part of me refused to move, as if instinct already knew the answer. After maybe 30 seconds, the tapping came again, closer to the window this time. That was enough. I reached for the flare gun I kept by the bed, pulled open the blinds. Nothing. Just snow, falling steady and thick, untouched. No footprints. No wind. No sound. I stayed awake till sunrise, clutching the flare gun like it could burn away whatever was out there. The next morning, I told myself I was imagining things. Loneliness does strange things to the mind. I packed up, but something stopped me before I could turn the key. On the driver's side mirror, someone or something had written in the condensation, "You came back." My stomach dropped. I stared at it for a long time, breath fogging the inside of the RV. The words looked traced by a finger, too human to be frost, too deliberate to be random. But what did it mean? I'd never been here before. I wiped the glass clean and started the engine. I told myself to leave, but then I remembered the stories I'd read years ago. Miners who disappeared in these mountains, whole families that abandoned their cabins overnight. People said they still saw lamps flickering in the windows of Kennecott after dark. It was stupid, but something about it hooked me. Maybe grief drives curiosity. Maybe loneliness does. Either way, I decided to stay one more night. That afternoon, I walked up toward the mill. The path was buried in snow, but the structure loomed enormous, like a cathedral of rust and ice. My boots crunched on wood that had been dead for a century. Inside, the air was colder than outside. Still, stale, heavy. My flashlight beam cut across iron chutes and gears, all frozen in mid-motion. It felt like walking into a throat. Every sound echoed too long, like the building itself was breathing. Halfway up the stairs, I heard something scrape against metal, a slow drag followed by a thud. My flashlight flickered. "Hello?" I called. My voice came back in strange, stuttering echoes, too many layers, like something else was whispering behind it. When I reached the second floor, I found boot prints in the dust. Fresh. Size looked similar to mine, maybe a little bigger. They led toward the elevator shaft and stopped at the edge. I looked down, 30 feet of darkness. That was when I saw the lantern. It was hanging below, faintly swinging. An old oil lantern, lit, burning with a steady orange flame. No wind, no movement, but it swayed slightly, as if someone had just walked away. I turned and bolted out of there. By the time I got back to the RV, the sky was turning gray-blue with twilight. My gloves were wet, my heartbeat thundered in my ears. I locked the doors, shut every curtain, and sat in the driver's seat staring at the road I should have taken. The bridge looked buried in white fog. I told myself to leave in the morning. I meant it this time, but around midnight the fog rolled in so thick I could barely see the front bumper, and then the sound returned. Tap, tap, tap. This time from the roof. I didn't move. The tapping turned into slow dragging, like someone crawling overhead. I reached for the flare gun again, but my hand was shaking. Then the voice came. Soft, almost conversational. "You stayed." The voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It sounded like it was speaking right through the roof, muffled by a few inches of metal and snow. A man's voice, older, cracked with cold. But there was something else in it too. Something not quite right. Like someone remembering how to speak after years of silence. I didn't answer. Couldn't. My tongue felt like a stone. I just sat there in the dark, every muscle locked. The flare gun trembled in my grip. For a few seconds there was only breathing. Steady, shallow, close. Then a sound I'll never forget. The slow slide of nails against the roof, moving toward the back of the RV. The walls creaked with each crawl. I stared at the ceiling, following the movement. It stopped above the rear window. Then came 3 faint taps on the glass, like it was testing to see if I'd turn around. I couldn't stand it anymore. I pulled the trigger and fired the flare straight through the vent hatch. A burst of red light filled the air, painting the fog and snow in bloody color. Nothing was there. But for a moment, just a split second, I saw the outline of a man's face burned into the fog above. Pale, hollow-eyed, watching. Then the light faded, and all that remained was the sound of falling snow. That night, I didn't sleep. When dawn came, I decided to get out of Kennecott for good. I didn't even make coffee. I just turned the key and prayed the engine would start. The RV coughed once, then roared to life. Relief flooded through me. I threw it in gear, rolling slowly toward the bridge, but the bridge wasn't there. Where the narrow crossing should have been was nothing but open river, frozen chunks of ice drifting downstream, the remnants of wood twisted and splintered on the banks. The entire bridge had collapsed sometime during the night. I killed the engine and just stared. I hadn't heard a thing. No cracking, no crashing, just silence, which meant one of two things. Either it had fallen earlier before I arrived, or something had wanted me to stay. I stepped outside, boots sinking into deep powder. The air burned with cold. I walked to the edge of the river, and there on the snow-covered ground beside the broken bridge were footprints. the same size as the ones I'd seen in the mill, leading straight toward my RV. I don't know what possessed me to follow them, but I did. The tracks led across the open clearing, past collapsed sheds and rusted rails, straight toward a small cabin on the edge of town. The door hung half open. I felt the wind pulling through it like a whisper. Inside, everything was preserved, as if the people who lived here had just stood up and left mid-meal. A table still set with rusted cutlery, a stove blackened with soot, a bed with a collapsed mattress, quilt still tucked in. On the wall, a photograph of two men in mining gear smiling, arms around each other. Written underneath in fading pencil, Kennicott Brothers, 1917. That's when I realized what was wrong with the footprints. They weren't pressed deep enough. The snow here was soft, powdery. It should have collapsed under the weight of a person. But the tracks were perfect, shallow, untouched by melting or drift, like impressions without weight. I backed out of the cabin. My breath came quick and sharp. I was about to run when I saw movement through the broken glass of the window. Someone was standing by my RV, tall, still, facing the door. The figure didn't move when I shouted, didn't turn, just stood there in that same still way you see scarecrows in fields, meant to look alive, but not quite. My flashlight flickered across the snow, catching something in its hand, a lantern. I ducked behind the cabin wall, chest heaving. The temperature felt like it dropped another 10 degrees. When I looked again, the figure was gone. No footprints leading away, no sound. That was enough. I sprinted back to the RV, slammed the door, and floored the gas. The tires spun, struggling for traction until they finally caught. I didn't care that the bridge was gone. I drove until the road ended in snowdrifts, then followed a rough track north that looked half buried but solid enough. After an hour, I stopped to catch my breath. The sun was low and weak, just a dull disk behind clouds. I opened the glove box for my map and froze. The same photograph from the cabin was there, the Kennicott brothers. But now there were 3 men in the picture. The third one stood behind them, face pale, wearing my jacket. I dropped it. My throat went dry. It was impossible. I'd never been in that cabin before today. The RV engine started to sputter, then died completely. The dash lights flickered once and went out. Silence. I stepped outside to check the battery cables, but the air felt heavier somehow, like the world itself was listening. The fog was back, rolling low along the ground, curling around my boots. Then, from somewhere deep within it, came the faint jingle of metal. Chains. It started slow, distant, then closer. A dragging rhythm that matched footsteps. My pulse spiked. I turned, scanning the fog, and saw the lantern glow again, orange and steady, floating between the trees. This time I didn't run. I just whispered, half to myself, half to whatever was listening. "What do you want from me?" The light flickered, and then a voice, low, gravelly, warped by wind, answered, "Finish what we started." My knees nearly gave out. I stumbled backward until my shoulder hit the RV. "What do you mean?" I shouted, "I don't even know you!" But the voice didn't come again, just the faint echo of laughter, old and cracked, swallowed by the fog. When the light finally disappeared, I climbed back inside and locked the doors. The temperature inside dropped fast. My breath fogged up the windshield, and in that fog, letters began to form again, just like before. You came back. Only this time, a second line appeared beneath it. Now finish the shift. I didn't move for a long time after that. The fog had started frosting over the windshield, forming thin white veins across the glass like something alive was growing there. My breath sounded too loud in the silence. Every nerve in my body screamed to get out of there, to leave the photo, the town, the words, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. Finish the shift. That phrase echoed through me. It wasn't random. It was something said, something human. Miners, shifts, work until the whistle blew. The old mill hadn't just been a building, it had been their whole world. And maybe it still was. I dug my journal out of the glove compartment, the one I kept for all my travels. I flipped through pages, Utah, Wyoming, Montana, until I found an entry from 2 years ago. A trip I'd almost forgotten, Rangel St. Elias National Park. I'd driven through here before, not Kennicott itself, but nearby. I'd stopped at a small roadside bar. I remembered the bartender, gray beard, Alaskan accent thick as snowdrift, telling me about the men who never left their shift. I thought it was just local ghost talk. He said sometimes when the fog rolls down from the glacier, you can hear the mine whistle blow again. And then he told me this: they say the ones who hear it were meant to work it. My skin crawled. I shut the journal and stared at the condensation words again. You came back. I hadn't realized it before, but maybe that old man was right. Maybe once you step into these forgotten places, you don't ever really leave. The RV creaked. Something shifted in the air, a weight, subtle but real, like someone had just stepped inside. I turned slowly toward the sleeping area. The curtain was drawn across, but it swayed slightly, though the air was still. Then I heard it. Breathing. Not my own, deep, labored, slow, coming from behind that curtain. I didn't think. I yanked the curtain open. Nothing. Just the empty bed, the rumpled blanket, the lantern I'd set there before sleeping. But it wasn't where I left it. It was standing upright now. Lit. The flame was blue. I backed away until my shoulders hit the counter. My hands trembled. "Who are you?" I whispered. A whisper came back, not from the air, but from inside the RV itself. The sound of air through a vent, forming words only because I wanted them to make sense. Shift never ended. And then the light went out. I bolted for the door. I didn't even bother with boots, just tore out into the cold in socks and thin pants, gasping. The air outside burned my lungs. The fog was thicker now, so thick it swallowed sound. I could barely see the outline of the RV behind me, and yet I could hear the faint clinking of metal again. Chains dragging, tools striking something hard. Clang, pause, clang. It was coming from underground. The ground beneath my feet vibrated faintly. Not enough to shake snow loose, but enough for me to feel the pulse of something alive and mechanical beneath the frozen crust. I ran. No sense of direction, no road to follow, just the desperate instinct to get away. The fog blurred everything into white and shadow. I didn't know where I was going until I saw it, an old sign jutting out of the ground, barely visible under frost. McCarthy, 5 miles. There was still life there, maybe. I could make it. I started walking fast, then running. My breath formed ghosts in the air. Behind me, the sounds grew louder, that awful, rhythmic clanging. It wasn't random anymore. It was coordinated, like multiple people working in sequence, mining, hammering. The ground trembled again, and then a whistle blew. It was faint at first, almost like a train in the distance, but it grew and grew until it tore through the silence with a piercing, metallic scream. I dropped to my knees and covered my ears, but the sound wasn't coming from outside. It was inside my head. The air thinned, pressing against me, making it hard to breathe. When it finally stopped, the world was still again. And the fog was gone. I was standing in front of the same mill. My footprints circled back on themselves, looping like I'd been walking in place. The RV was there, engine off, lights out. The snow around it looked undisturbed, except for a set of fresh footprints leading from the door toward me. I followed them with my eyes. They ended where I stood. I don't remember falling, but I must have. The next thing I knew, I was lying inside the RV, the heater humming faintly again, wrapped in my blanket. For a moment, I thought maybe I dreamt the whole thing. Maybe exhaustion had made me hallucinate. But then I saw the lantern, still burning with that blue flame, sitting neatly beside my pillow. I didn't touch it. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I tried the radio, dead. GPS, blank. My phone battery had drained completely overnight. I felt cut off from everything, not just people, but time. When the sun began to set again, I made a decision. I packed my things, loaded the RV, and started driving toward where the bridge had been. I didn't care if it was gone. I'd find a way across, or I'd freeze trying. But when I reached the river, the bridge was there again. Perfect. Intact. Like it had never fallen. I hesitated, gripping the wheel. The tracks in the snow ahead of me, identical to my own tire treads, already crossed it. And on the far side, half hidden by trees, stood a figure, the same man I'd seen before. Lantern in hand, watching. He didn't move, just stood there, a faint glow surrounding him. I honked the horn once. No reaction. The fog began to rise again from the water, wrapping around him like a veil. Then, for the first time, he lifted his hand and pointed behind me. I turned. Through the fog, barely visible, was the silhouette of another RV. Same make, same color, parked in the exact spot I'd been camping, and standing beside it, me. Not moving, not breathing, just watching. The first thing that hit me was the impossible stillness of that figure. The other me, same jacket, same stance, even the same way the shoulders slumped like exhaustion had replaced muscle. I blinked hard, thinking maybe it was a trick of the light or my reflection on the fogged windshield, but reflections don't breathe, and this one did. A faint plume of white vapor rose from its mouth. My heart hammered so violently I thought I'd black out. I threw the RV into reverse, wheels crunching on ice, engine roaring in protest. The figure didn't move, just watched. When the headlights swept across the trees, I saw the fog pulse, like it was drawing breath too. Then came the whisper. Low, grainy, dragging through the air like static on an old radio. Don't leave the shift unfinished. I slammed the accelerator. The RV jerked forward and sped across the bridge. The boards rattled under the weight, metal joints groaning, but it held. I kept my eyes fixed on the road ahead, refusing to glance in the mirrors. I didn't want to know what was behind me. Not anymore. By the time I hit the main highway, the morning light was a pale smear over the horizon. I drove for hours, numb. My thoughts drifted in circles, looping like the road beneath me. Each memory of that place twisted, folding in on itself. The voice, the lantern, the photograph, the copy of me. When I finally stopped, I was 50 miles south, near a small settlement called Chitina. Civilization again, at least by Alaskan standards. A gas pump, a diner, 2 old pickup trucks out front. I parked and stumbled inside. The waitress, a woman in her 60s with silver hair tied back under a wool cap, took one look at me and frowned. "You all right, Hahn? You look like you've seen a ghost." I almost laughed at that, but the sound caught in my throat. "Kennecott," I managed. "I was camping there." Her face went pale. "Nobody camps there this time of year. Roads close off after the first storm." "They didn't close off," I said. "I made it through. But the bridge," she cut me off, shaking her head. "That bridge collapsed 3 winters ago, ain't been rebuilt yet? You sure you weren't near McCarthy instead?" I stared at her. "No. Kennecott, I was there. I saw." She put a hand on my arm. "Sweetheart, nobody's been able to drive up that far since 2022. The road washed out. Even snowmobiles don't risk it. You must have been somewhere else." Her tone was gentle, but her eyes said something else entirely, like she didn't want me to finish the sentence. I didn't argue, just ordered coffee and sat by the window, staring at the snow-covered lot. The fog had lifted. Everything looked normal again. The smell of bacon and pine cleaner filled the air. A radio played softly in the corner. For the first time in days, I felt safe. That illusion lasted maybe 10 minutes. I was stirring sugar into my cup when the bell over the diner door chimed. A man walked in, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a heavy parka crusted with frost. He carried something under one arm. As he passed my table, he glanced at me once. His eyes were pale blue, almost translucent, and when he smiled, it didn't reach them. He took a seat at the counter. The waitress went over. I couldn't hear their words, but I saw her face drain of color. The man slid the object he'd been carrying across the counter toward her. She shook her head and backed away, one hand over her mouth. Then the man turned slightly, enough for me to see what he'd placed there. A photograph. My photograph. The same one from the cabin wall. The Kennecott brothers. Only now the image was torn down the middle, and my face was on the half that remained. I stood up too fast, knocking over my coffee. The man turned fully toward me. His expression didn't change. Still that half smile, still those hollow eyes. "You left early," he said. His voice was the same as the one that had whispered outside my RV. Calm, measured. "You weren't supposed to." I backed toward the door. "I don't know what you want." He tilted his head almost kindly. "We all got work to finish." The waitress whispered something, sounded like a prayer. When I blinked, he was gone. Just gone. No door chime, no footprints in the snow outside. The photograph lay on the counter, edges still wet like it had come straight out of water. I didn't pay. I didn't even take my coat. I just ran back to the RV and drove. The next 100 miles were a blur of white. The road seemed endless, curling through mountains that all looked the same. The sky darkened early, that eerie Arctic twilight where day and night share the same gray breath. My hands ached from gripping the wheel, but something in the mirrors caught my eye. A faint, flickering light behind me. Far back at first, then closer. It swayed in rhythm with the turns of the road. I knew that movement, the lantern. I pressed harder on the gas, the engine whined, the light kept pace. I passed a sign for the next town, Valdez, 40 miles. But the road ahead began to blur. The fog returned, thicker than ever. I slowed, headlights cutting through swirling white like smoke. The GPS flickered on the dash, first dead, then alive again. But instead of coordinates, it displayed 3 words in cracked pixels. Shift still open. The RV stuttered, then came to a full stop on its own. My foot slammed the pedal, but it was locked, frozen in place. The headlights dimmed until only darkness remained. I sat there in the silence, the air inside turning colder by the second. Then I heard the door handle creak. It turned slowly. I wanted to move, to grab the flare gun, to do anything, but my body wouldn't respond. The handle stopped. A pause. Then it turned again, harder this time, and the latch gave. The door opened an inch, enough for the wind to slip through and whisper my name. Aaron. It was my voice, and behind it, faint but rising, came the long, low wail of a mine whistle blowing one last time. I don't remember how I got out. I don't remember running. I just remember snow under my knees, trees rising around me, the sound of chains clinking faintly in the distance. And when I finally looked back, the RV was gone. Only the lantern remained, half buried in the snow, burning blue. The forest swallowed everything. Sound, breath, thought. Snow clung to my clothes like it didn't want to let go. I must have wandered for hours, maybe days. I can't tell anymore. Alaska doesn't play fair with time. Up there, the dark isn't just absence of light, it's its own geography. It moves, it watches, it learns your steps. At some point, I found a logging road buried under snowdrift. I followed it downhill until I reached the edge of a frozen lake. The ice looked solid, thick, like a silver mirror stretching into fog. But what caught my eye wasn't the lake. It was the reflection. There were lights behind me. Dozens of them. Lanterns. They glowed in the mist like fireflies, orange and blue, moving slowly across the slope where I'd come from. I counted 7, then 10, then too many to tell. All drifting closer, as if the entire ghost town had decided to follow. I dropped to my knees and whispered the only thing I could think. Please, just let me go. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the ice beneath me groaned. A low, thunderous crack echoed across the lake, splitting the silence. I froze, staring down. The fracture spread like lightning under my knees, spidering outward toward the far shore. Beneath it, the black water churned with movement, slow, deliberate, as though something enormous was turning beneath the surface. And then I heard it. That same voice, old, tired, but no longer angry, just certain. We don't leave until it's done. The lanterns flickered brighter, reflecting in the ice. I could see faces now, blurred, pale, motionless. Dozens of them. Miners in torn coats, eyes hollow, skin like wax. Their mouths moved in perfect unison, though no sound came. I tried to run, but the ice gave way beneath my boot. My leg plunged into freezing water. The cold was so sharp it felt like being stabbed. I screamed, clawing at the ice, dragging myself free. The faces didn't move closer, but the light they cast followed me. Stretching, bending, crawling over the ground. I made it back to the tree line and collapsed. My lungs burned. My fingers were blue. I thought I'd die there, frozen in a nameless patch of Alaskan wilderness. But the air shifted again, and through the fog I saw it. Headlights. A snowcat, maybe half a mile away, rumbling slow along the ridge. I stumbled toward it, waving my arms, shouting until my throat bled. The vehicle stopped. A man climbed out, stocky, bearded, wearing a parka lined with fur. He shouted something I couldn't hear, then ran to meet me. His voice finally cut through the wind. Jesus Christ, buddy, where the hell did you come from? I collapsed in his arms. The next thing I remember is warmth. A cabin. Fire crackling. the smell of coffee and diesel. The man introduced himself as Jake, a ranger stationed out of McCarthy. He said he'd been checking avalanche warnings when he spotted me through the snow. "Lucky you weren't 10 minutes later," he said. "That storm behind you's going to bury half the ridge." I tried to explain. About Kennecott, the ghost town, the bridge, the lanterns. He listened quietly, expression unreadable. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "Funny thing," he said. Kennecott's off-limits this season. State sealed the access road last fall. Snow swallowed half the structures. Ain't been a soul up there for months. "I was there," I said weakly. "The mill's still standing. I saw lights. People." He sighed. "You probably saw reflections. Ice tricks the eyes." I shook my head. "No, they spoke. They knew my name." Jake poured me another cup of coffee, his hand steady. "You'd be surprised how many folks come up here chasing ghosts," he said. "They don't always make it back." I wanted to argue, but exhaustion buried me. I must have fallen asleep sitting there. When I woke, dawn was breaking through the frost on the cabin window. Jake was gone. The fire had burned to embers. I stood, stiff and aching, and saw something on the table beside the empty mug. A photograph. The same one. The Kennecott brothers. But this time it was different. The faces were clearer. One of the brothers, the one in the middle, looked exactly like Jake, and written in fresh ink along the bottom edge, "Shift completed. Thank you, Aaron." I stumbled outside. The storm had passed. The snowcat tracks led down toward the valley, but the cabin behind me looked older now. Boards warped, roof caved in, windows shattered, like it hadn't been used in years. I walked back to the lake. No footprints, no lanterns, only endless white. When I finally reached the nearest town days later, I told the ranger station everything. They checked. No record of anyone named Jake working in McCarthy. No ranger posts in that area at all. I left Alaska that week, sold the RV in Anchorage, bought a plane ticket south. I swore I'd never camp again. But here's the part that keeps me up at night. 2 months later, a parcel arrived at my house in Oregon. No return address. Inside was a small, corroded lantern. Old-fashioned, the kind used in mines a century ago. Inside the glass, burned faint and blue, was a flame that never went out, and taped to the handle, one final photograph. The Kennecott brothers. 4 of them now. The new one, me, smiling faintly, hand resting on Jake's shoulder. I don't know what the afterlife looks like. I don't know if there's justice in the things that haunt us, or if they're just echoes repeating old stories. But I do know this. Some places don't forget who's walked through them. They remember the weight of your boots, the sound of your breath, the moment you chose to stay one night too long. Alaska's ghost towns aren't empty. They're waiting. And if you ever find yourself parked in the middle of nowhere, engine dead, fog pressing against the windows, listen carefully. If you hear a whistle blow in the distance, don't wait for it to end. Just drive. Because once the shift starts again, it never ends. I've always believed that silence can be more dangerous than sound. It's not the howling of the wind that unnerves you in the mountains. It's when the wind suddenly stops, as if something's listening back. My name's Evan Rourke. I'm 34, and last winter I took my Volkswagen Westphalia camper up into the Oregon wilderness near Mount Jefferson, chasing peace, solitude, and maybe a little bit of redemption. I just quit my job in Portland, left behind a relationship that ended with more silence than words, and I thought a few weeks camping under snow would give me clarity. Instead, I came face to face with something ancient, something that reminded me that not every silence is empty. The drive into the Jefferson wilderness that day felt like falling into another century. The forest roads were narrow and winding, the pines hung heavy with snow, and the world looked frozen in time. My van, a mustard yellow 82 Westphalia, chugged and groaned up the slope as I crossed deeper into white wilderness. The farther I went, the more I felt a strange weight in the air. It wasn't just the cold. It was like the mountain was holding its breath. I set up camp near Brighton Bush Lake, a few miles from the base of Mount Jefferson. The air there was thin and sharp. Every sound felt magnified. The creak of ice, the distant echo of something cracking deep beneath the snowpack. I remember stepping out that first night, lantern in hand, just listening. You could hear the faint hiss of frozen branches settling, the occasional gust of wind brushing over the lake's surface. But beneath it all was something. Rhythmic. A soft, pulsing sound that came and went, almost like a low hum from beneath the ice. I tried to ignore it. Told myself it was pressure shifting under the frozen lake, or maybe a trick of the wind bouncing off the cliffs. I made a fire, cooked a small meal, and told myself I'd finally escaped the noise of the world. But sometime after midnight, I woke up to what sounded like voices, faint, distant, and overlapping. Not close enough to make out, but just clear enough that I couldn't dismiss it as wind. The voices had a pattern, a rise and fall, like chanting. I lay there, completely still in my sleeping bag, staring up at the van's ceiling as the sound drifted closer, then faded again. My first thought was that maybe there were hikers nearby, maybe some kind of winter survival group. But who would camp out there in that cold on a weeknight with a storm warning in the forecast? The next morning, I walked down to the lake to check for tracks. The surface was dusted with new snow, pristine, untouched, except for a single line of prints. They weren't boot prints, though. They looked more like bare feet, wide and splayed, pressing deep into the crust of snow. There were at least 6 sets, all leading from the tree line to the lake's edge, and then stopping. No return path, no sign of struggle, just vanished into the frozen expanse. I remember the way the hair rose on the back of my neck. Something about those prints looked wrong. Not human, not animal, just off. The toes were too long, the arches too flat. I crouched beside them, breath fogging in the cold air, and could swear the ground beneath me was vibrating, faintly, like something alive and restless below the ice. That day, clouds began to roll over the ridge, thick and gray. I decided to hunker down, maybe ride out the storm for a couple days. But as the light faded, I felt it again. That same pulse beneath the ground, the same deep hum from the lake. I lit a lantern, stepped outside, and the air was so still it hurt. Then I heard it, that cry. It wasn't an animal, it wasn't the wind, it was human, or something close to it. A long, drawn-out wail that started low like the beginning of a word, then broke into something guttural and ragged. It echoed off the trees, bounced against the mountain, and hung in the air long after it stopped. I froze where I stood, my breath forming small clouds that seemed too loud in the silence. Then slowly, from across the lake, I saw a light. It flickered faintly, a small orange glow like a torch, moving along the far shore. Then another, then 3 more. They weaved between the trees, forming a slow procession. The chanting came again, clearer now, and I realized it wasn't one voice. It was many, deep and overlapping, carrying a strange rhythm that didn't sound like any language I knew. I should have gone back inside, but curiosity, or maybe fear disguised as curiosity, made me step closer to the lake. The snow creaked beneath my boots, the cold air biting at my face. The chanting grew louder, and suddenly the lights stopped. The air went still. Then I heard a splash, a single heavy sound, like something massive had broken through the ice. Then the chanting turned into screams. I ran back to my van, slammed the door, and killed the lantern. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would echo in the walls. The screams carried on for maybe a minute, maybe 5. I couldn't tell. Then everything went quiet again, just the wind returning, brushing against the metal roof. I sat there in the dark until morning, too afraid to move. When I finally dared to step outside, there was no sign of the lights, no prints but my own. The lake's surface looked the same, frozen, silent. But in the middle, maybe 30 feet out, I saw a hole in the ice, perfectly circular like it had been cut with a torch. Steam rose from it, and around it, carved into the snow, were symbols, spiral-likes etched with what looked like fingers. Something in me knew I needed to leave. I packed fast, hands shaking, but as I loaded my gear, I caught something glinting in the snow near the tree line. A small object half buried, a wooden mask, cracked and blackened at the edges, carved with the same spiral patterns I'd seen on the ice. I picked it up without thinking, then felt a sudden rush of heat shoot up my arm. I dropped it instantly, but when it hit the snow, it didn't cool. The air around it shimmered, faintly, like heat rising from pavement. That's when I noticed the hum again, stronger now, vibrating through the soles of my boots. It came from beneath the ground, pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. And then I heard something else, a whisper, so close it felt like it came from inside my skull. "Return what was taken." The voice was low, guttural, and impossibly close. I spun around. Nothing. Just trees and snow and that endless mountain silence. That's when the wind picked up, sudden, violent. Snow whipped sideways, and I saw movement between the trees, dark figures, too tall, too still. They stood watching me, half hidden by the storm, their outlines shimmering against the white. I could see their faces, or maybe masks. Blank, hollow-eyed, carved from wood or bone. I ran. I don't even remember unlocking the van, just the sound of the engine struggling to turn over as the storm screamed around me. When it finally caught, I floored it down the trail, tires spinning on ice. In the rearview mirror, I saw the shapes move. Fast, impossibly fast, weaving between the trees. I didn't stop driving until I hit pavement again, somewhere near Detroit Lake. I parked at a rest stop, shaking, gasping, hands white on the steering wheel. And that's when I noticed something sitting on the passenger seat. The mask. I swear I never brought it with me. It was just there, wet, steaming, and humming softly. I stared at that mask for what felt like forever. The smell coming off it wasn't smoke or wood. It was something sour and metallic, like wet iron and burnt sap. The edges still pulsed with faint warmth, and I could see steam curling off the seat fabric. I opened the door, grabbed it with a rag, and hurled it into the snowbank beside the rest stop. For a moment, it just sat there, half buried in white, the carved spirals glistening like veins beneath its surface. Then, I swear on my life, it moved. Not much, just a slow tilt as though it were sinking or breathing. I didn't wait to see more. I jumped back into the van, started the engine, and drove until I saw the first sign of human life. A small diner near Adanga, lights glowing like a lifeline through the fog. When I stepped inside, the warmth hit me like a wave, but something about that place felt off too. Everyone turned to look. Just a few locals, but their eyes lingered too long. A man behind the counter, heavy-set with a gray beard, squinted and said, "You come down from Jefferson?" I hesitated. Yeah, I was camping near Brightonbush. He froze, spat into a napkin, and muttered something under his breath. Then, without another word, he walked over to a dusty shelf near the register and pulled down a newspaper clipping, yellowed and torn. He set it on the counter and slid it toward me. The headline was barely legible through the creases, "Search called off for missing anthropologist near Mount Jefferson." The article dated back to 1979. A woman named Dr. Mara Keller, a cultural researcher from Oregon State University, had vanished while studying what she called the lost tribe of Jefferson. According to her notes, she'd been researching a pre-contact civilization rumored to inhabit the upper slopes, a people who disappeared following a massive winter storm in the early 1800s. The locals called them the Silent Ones. I looked up at the man. "This tribe, were they real?" He shrugged. "Depends who you ask. Some folks say the mountain buried them alive after they turned their back on it. Others say they went underground, literally. Built homes under the ice. Every few decades, someone goes missing up there. Sometimes we find the camps, never the people." My stomach twisted. Has anyone heard, chanting or seen lights by the lake? The diner went dead quiet. The man's eyes flicked toward the window where snow still fell in thick, soundless sheets. "You don't ask questions like that," he said finally. "You just get far from that mountain, and you don't bring nothing back." I left the diner before my food even came. But that night, parked at a small campground near the highway, I realized I'd made a mistake. I hadn't really left the mountain, it had followed me. The hum was back. Soft at first, like an engine idling in the distance, then stronger, shaking the van slightly on its suspension. I pressed my ear to the metal wall. It was coming from beneath me. The ground itself seemed to pulse, alive, rhythmic. And faintly, under that vibration, I heard voices again. Not words this time, more like cries, muffled and strained as if they were trapped beneath miles of snow. I turned on every light inside the van, grabbed my flashlight, and checked outside. The snow had stopped, and the night was moonless, pitch black. My footprints were the only ones leading away from the van, but then off in the tree line, something reflected my beam. Eyes. No, not eyes. 2 tiny mirrors, the surface of something wet or polished. Then another set, and another. Dozens of small reflections like glints of frost, except they were moving. Slowly, side to side, circling. I climbed back inside and locked the door. My breathing was ragged, every sound amplified by the van's thin walls. Then, through the windshield, I saw a shape pass by. Tall, thin, wearing what looked like a tattered animal hide. It stopped beside the van, head turning toward me. The face, if you could call it that, was covered by a wooden mask. The same spirals, the same blank eyes. I killed the lights. My heartbeat filled the silence. The figure leaned close, pressing its mask against the glass. I could see frost forming where it breathed. Then it whispered, a dry rasp that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Return what was taken. The air grew colder. My breath turned white, and my skin prickled like static. I reached for the glove compartment, desperate for my flashlight, and that's when I saw it lying there. The mask. The same one I'd thrown into the snow earlier. I screamed and flung open the door, stumbling into the night. The cold hit me like knives. I ran until my lungs burned, until the lights of the van were a fading glow behind me. I tripped face first into the snow, and for a moment, everything went still again. Then the ground beneath me shifted. I felt it move, not collapse, move, like something crawling beneath the frozen crust. My hands sank into the snow, and I felt something solid underneath. Smooth. Cold. I brushed the powder away, revealing a flat surface of black stone. Carved into it was the same spiral pattern, and that's when the voices began again. Not from the trees, not from the air, but from below the stone. Hundreds of them. Crying, chanting, whispering. It was like the entire mountain was speaking at once. Return what was taken. I ran. I didn't stop. I don't even remember getting back to the van, only the sound of the engine roaring to life and the sight of headlights cutting through the storm as I tore down the road. But I'll never forget what I saw in the rearview mirror as I left the wilderness behind. The trees along the road, they were filled with faces, dozens, maybe hundreds, carved into the trunks, their eyes hollow, their mouths open in a silent scream. And beneath the ice of my windshield, a faint spiral had formed, etched in frost, pulsing softly like a heartbeat. That night, I drove straight through to Salem. I didn't sleep, didn't eat. I just kept driving until the sun came up and the mountain was far behind me. But here's the thing. You can't really leave that place. Not once you've heard it. The hum never stops. Some nights it's faint, buried under the noise of the city. Other nights, it's so loud I can feel my furniture shake. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I see those figures again, standing in the snow, masks gleaming under moonlight, waiting for me to finish what I started. I think I know what they wanted. It wasn't the mask. It wasn't even me. It was something older, something they left behind long before any of us came here, something still alive beneath the mountain. And every winter, when the storms roll down and the snow buries the world, you can hear them, the lost tribe crying beneath Mount Jefferson, calling for someone to listen, calling for someone to return what was taken. I didn't tell anyone for months. Every time I tried to explain, the words came out sounding insane, like the story of a man who lost himself in the snow and brought back nightmares instead of memories. I tried to convince myself it was just the isolation, maybe the altitude, or the echo chamber of grief that had followed me up that mountain. But deep down, I knew the truth. You don't imagine a hum that shakes the ground. You don't hallucinate symbols carved into frozen stone. I tried to move on, moved back to Eugene, got a small apartment near the river, even sold the van. The buyer was some college kid, bright-eyed, said he wanted to take it up north for a ski trip. When I handed him the keys, I almost warned him not to go anywhere near Jefferson, but I didn't want to sound crazy. I just told him to stay warm and watch the weather. That night, I slept for the first time in weeks. Deep, dreamless sleep. When I woke up, the air felt still, normal. No hum, no whispers. I thought maybe somehow it was over. Then, a week later, I got a call. Unknown number. When I answered, all I could hear was wind, strong, howling, like the kind that tears through tree lines in winter. I said hello once, twice, no reply. Then a voice came through, faint, shaky. "This is Evan Rourke, right? It was the kid who'd bought my van." His voice was trembling. "You said it was tuned up good, right? Because it's not right. The radio won't turn off. It keeps picking up something, some kind of chanting, out by Detroit Lake. I thought it was static, but then silence, just wind, then faintly, 'Return what was taken.'" The line went dead. I drove out that night. I don't know why. Guilt, maybe, or the sick hope that if I found him, I could undo whatever I'd started. The storm had already moved in by the time I hit the back roads. The snow was thick, heavy, like the air itself was slowing me down. I followed the highway to the last point of cell reception, then kept going toward Detroit Lake. By the time I reached the pull-off near the water, it was midnight. The snow reflected the glow of my headlights, turning the world into a blinding white tunnel. The van sat there, half buried, door open, the engine still running. Inside, it was empty. No footprints leading away, no sign of struggle, just the hum. That same deep, vibrating tone, shaking through the steering column, the windows, the floor. And on the dashboard, lying perfectly centered, was the mask. This time, it was frozen solid, frost climbing its edges, the spirals coated in ice. But under that frost, I could still see faint light pulsing, like something breathing beneath the surface. I backed away. Every instinct told me to leave, but as I turned, I saw something down by the frozen lake. A trail of footprints, bare, wide, deep, just like before. I followed them to the shoreline, every step sinking into snow that groaned like it didn't want to hold my weight. The air was thick with fog. The hum grew louder, almost unbearable, vibrating inside my chest. I reached the ice's edge, and there it was again. The hole. Perfect, circular, black as tar. Steam rose from it, carrying a stench like burnt earth and old blood. Something moved beneath it, slow, deliberate, massive. I fell to my knees, staring as faint shapes shimmered below the ice. Faces pressed against the underside, mouths open in silent wails. The hum became a voice, then many. "Return what was taken." I ran, slipping on the ice, lungs burning. The forest around me seemed to close in, every shadow stretching, every tree face carved with those same screaming mouths. I could feel them watching, not chasing, just waiting. When I made it back to the van, the hum had stopped. Everything was silent. I looked inside one last time. The mask was gone. I left the engine running and walked back to my truck, drove until the sky lightened behind me. I never looked back. That was 3 months ago. Since then, the hum hasn't returned. But sometimes when it snows, I can hear faint whispers carried on the wind. It's like they're moving south, further down the range. People in town have started talking about weird things happening near Santiam Pass. Missing snowmobilers, strange lights under the drifts, a sound like distant singing late at night. I've thought a lot about what that voice meant. Return what was taken. Maybe it wasn't talking about the mask. Maybe it was something deeper. Maybe those people, that tribe, they didn't die up there. Maybe they were swallowed by the mountain itself. And maybe every time we set foot there, every time we take something, a photo, a relic, a footprint, we're waking it up again. Some nights, I dream I'm back there, standing by the lake. The snow's falling in perfect silence, and the ice below me glows with that same soft pulse. Then I hear them, hundreds of voices crying beneath my feet. Not angry, not vengeful, just begging. The last thing I see before I wake up is my reflection in the ice, but it isn't mine anymore. The face staring back is wearing a mask, and as the hum rises, the spiral opens. That's when I know the mountain's still listening. That's when I remember not everything buried in the snow is dead. Some things are just waiting to be heard.